Her fingers drummed against the steering wheel of her old Honda Civic, a nervous habit she'd developed over years of late-night drives between jobs. The digital clock on her dashboard blinked 11:47 p.m. Another shift done at Jerry's diner. Another night of dodging wandering hands and collecting mediocre tips. She caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark eyes, tired but alert. Her natural curls pulled up in their usual messy bun. A few strands had escaped during her shift, framing her face like question marks. At 27, Nova felt simultaneously too young and too old. Too young to have given up on her dreams of becoming a designer. Too old to still be working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Just another year, she whispered to herself, a mantra she'd been repeating since leaving her parents' small imported goods store 3 years ago. The memory of that day still stung. Her father's disapproving silence, her mother's tears. They'd immigrated from the Caribbean with nothing but hope and determination, building their little store into something stable, something safe, and she'd walked away from it all. The windshield wipers created a hypnotic rhythm, almost lulling her into that dangerous state of highway meditation when she saw it, headlights spinning wildly ahead, the screech of tires fighting against wet asphalt. Time seemed to slow as she watched a large van careen off the road, rolling once before coming to rest on its side. Nova didn't remember pulling over. She didn't remember running through the rain. Later, she would try to piece together those moments. The smell of gasoline, the crackle of electricity in the air, the way her wet clothes clung to her skin as she scrambled toward the overturned vehicle. The driver was barely conscious. A tall man slumped awkwardly against his seatbelt. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. But what struck Nova most was the peaceful expression on his face, as if he'd finally found a moment of rest in the chaos. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. The man's eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue against his pale skin. "We need to get you out of here. Now." She could smell smoke, see the first flickers of flame from the engine. The seatbelt release wouldn't budge, jammed from the impact. Nova pulled the small pocket knife she carried for work from her jacket, soaring through the belt while keeping one eye on the growing flames. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep him conscious as she worked. "Elijah," he mumbled. "Elijah Monroe." "Okay, Elijah Monroe, I'm Nova, and we're about to become very well acquainted." With a final cut, the belt gave way. She barely registered his size as she helped him maneuver through the broken window, all 6 feet of him somehow flowing through her 5'8" frame's guidance. They had barely made it 20 feet when the van erupted, the force of the explosion knocking them both to the wet ground. Nova found herself shielding this stranger with her own body, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might escape her chest. For a moment, they just lay there in the rain, the orange glow of the fire painting everything in surreal colors. Nova became acutely aware of the man's breathing, the way his chest rose and fell against her arm, the faint scent of coffee and motor oil that clung to his clothes. "You saved my life," he said finally, his voice rough but clear. Nova sat up, pushing her soaked hair out of her face. "Yeah, well, I couldn't let you die. Who'd tip the waitresses at Jerry's?" The joke fell flat, her usual defense mechanism failing in the face of such raw intensity. Elijah Monroe struggled to sit up, wincing. In the firelight, Nova could see him clearly for the first time. Mid-30s, weathered hands, the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His clothes were simple, jeans, a grey t-shirt now stained with blood and dirt, a baseball cap lost somewhere in the chaos. "You're hurt," she said, noticing how he cradled his right arm. "I'm alive," he corrected, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Because of you." The wail of approaching sirens cut through the night, and Nova felt the adrenaline begin to fade, leaving her shaky and cold. She should have been heading to her second job at the convenience store by now. Instead, she was sitting in the rain with a stranger who looked at her like she'd given him something far more valuable than just his life. "The police will want statements," she said, standing up and offering him her hand. "And you need to get checked out by the paramedics." Elijah took her hand, but didn't let go immediately after standing. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried weight like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples she couldn't yet see. Nova nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of his gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "They wouldn't have." As red and blue lights began to paint the wet landscape, Nova had no way of knowing that this moment, this random collision of lives on a rainy Georgia night, would be the beginning of something that would change everything. She couldn't know that the man whose life she'd just saved had already given up on living long before his van left the road. She couldn't know that sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest choices, or that fate has a way of disguising itself as coincidence. All she knew was that she was cold, wet, and late for her second job. And that somehow, for reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't stop looking at the quiet strength in Elijah Monroe's eyes, couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, something that went far beyond simply pulling a stranger from a burning vehicle. The night air was thick with the smell of rain and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like the turning of a great page. 3 weeks after the accident, Nova's life had settled back into its familiar rhythm. The incident report was filed, the local paper ran a small story that nobody read, and her manager at the convenience store had eventually accepted her excuse for missing that night's shift. Everything should have returned to normal, except she couldn't stop thinking about those blue eyes. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Jerry's diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Nova balanced 5 plates along her arms, a skill perfected through years of practice, while mentally calculating how many hours of sleep she'd managed to get between shifts. The answer was never enough. "Order up for table 7!" Jerry's voice boomed from the kitchen, startling her from her thoughts. "Got it," she called back, delivering her current load before heading to the pickup window. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, mixing with the subtle undertone of cleaning supplies and the ever-present scent of deep-fried everything. She was reaching for the new order when the bell above the door chimed. Nova glanced up automatically, a greeting ready on her lips, and froze. Elijah Monroe stood in the doorway, looking simultaneously out of place and exactly where he belonged. He wore the same style of clothes she remembered from the accident: worn jeans, a plain grey t-shirt, work boots that had seen better days. The cut above his eye had healed to a faint pink line, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. Their eyes met across the diner, and Nova felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine or exhaustion. "Well," she said, finding her voice, "you're looking better than the last time I saw you." The words came out more softly than she intended, lacking her usual sharp humor. "No fire this time," he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the beginning of a smile, though the coffee here might be just as dangerous. Nova surprised herself by laughing. "Sit wherever you like. I'll grab you a menu." She watched as he chose a booth by the window, noting how he sat with his back to the wall, eyes taking in the whole room. There was something methodical about his movements, as if every action was carefully considered before execution. When she approached his table, menu in hand, she noticed other details she'd missed in the chaos of their first meeting: the slight silver at his temples, the way his hands, rough and calloused, handled the worn menu with unexpected gentleness. "What brings you to this side of town?" she asked, pen poised above her notepad. "Besides our allegedly dangerous coffee," Elijah looked up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her want to look away. "I've been driving past this place every morning for the past week," he admitted. "Today, I finally worked up the courage to come in." The honesty of his answer caught her off guard. Most men who came into the diner tried to impress her with swagger or false confidence. This quiet admission of nervousness was something entirely different. "Well," she said, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite the warmth spreading through her chest, "since you risked life and limb to be here, what can I get you?" "Whatever you recommend." He handed back the menu without looking at it. "I trust your judgment." The weight of those words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Nova felt her professional smile soften into something more genuine. "One trustful breakfast coming up," she said, turning toward the kitchen before he could see the blush she felt rising in her cheeks. Throughout her shift, Nova found her eyes drawn to his booth. Elijah worked while he ate, typing on a laptop that had seen better days, occasionally making notes in a battered notebook. He didn't try to engage her in unnecessary conversation when she refilled his coffee, but his eyes followed her movements with quiet attention. As the morning rush died down, Nova found herself back at his table, drawn there by something she couldn't quite name. "So," she said, sliding into the seat across from him during her break, "are you going to tell me what you really do? Because no ordinary truck driver types that intensely on a laptop." Elijah closed his computer, giving her his full attention. "I own a small transportation company," he said. 5 trucks, local routes mostly. I could work from an office, but I prefer to stay connected to the actual work. You were driving one of your own trucks that night, Nova realized. The van that crashed. He nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. It helps me remember what matters. Easy to lose sight of that behind a desk. Nova understood that better than she wanted to admit. It was why she'd left her parents' store, the fear of losing herself in the safety of their carefully built world. Your parents' store, Elijah said, as if reading her thoughts. You mentioned it that night, while we were waiting for the police. An import shop. Caribbean specialties, she nodded, surprised he remembered. They built it from nothing after moving here. Expected me to take over one day. The old guilt crept into her voice despite her efforts to keep it out. But you wanted something else. I wanted to design things, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Create spaces that make people feel something. But dreams don't pay bills, so here I am. Here you are, he echoed, but there was no judgment in his voice. Saving lives and serving coffee. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the ambient sounds of the diner, plates clinking, conversations humming, the rhythmic whir of the ceiling fans. I should get back to work, Nova said finally, though she made no move to stand. I should let you, Elijah agreed, remaining equally still. The moment stretched, delicate as spun glass, until Jerry's voice shattered it. Nova. Table 3's getting restless. She stood, smoothing her apron with hands that trembled slightly. Well, Mr. Munro, I hope our coffee lived up to its dangerous reputation. Elijah, he corrected softly, and I think I might need to conduct more research before making a final judgment. Their eyes met again, and Nova felt something shift in the air between them, like the moment before a storm breaks, full of electricity and possibility. See you tomorrow then, she said, and it wasn't really a question. Tomorrow, he confirmed, and it felt like a promise. As she walked away, Nova could feel his eyes on her back, warm as sunlight. She didn't turn around, but she smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one she wore for customers. Outside, the Georgia sun continued its slow arc across the sky, unaware that in a small diner on a quiet morning, two people who had given up on certain kinds of hope were discovering that sometimes the best beginnings disguise themselves as ordinary moments, and somewhere in the universe, fate smiled, pleased with its handiwork. 2 months into their morning routine, Nova began to notice the little things about Elijah that didn't fit the picture of a simple transportation company owner, like how he remembered every regular customer's order at the diner, but never spoke to them directly, or how he always carried a small notebook filled with what looked like poetry, but could have been song lyrics. She'd caught glimpses of his handwriting, neat and compressed, filling margins with thoughts he never shared. Today, she watched him from behind the counter as he parked his newly replaced van in his usual spot. The summer heat was already thick at 7 a.m., making the air conditioning work overtime. He walked in wearing his standard uniform of jeans and grey t-shirt, but there was something different about his expression, a heaviness she hadn't seen before. You look like you could use the dangerous coffee today, she said, as he slid into his usual booth, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. Make it lethal, he replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nova poured his coffee, then hesitated. The morning rush wouldn't start for another 30 minutes. Want company? He looked up, surprised. They'd shared conversations over the past weeks, but always in snippets, a few minutes here and there between her other tables. This was different. Please, he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Nova sat down, wrapping her hands around her own cup of coffee. Bad night? Elijah stared into his cup as if it held answers. Anniversary, he said finally. Of the divorce. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. Nova had suspected there was a story there, had seen the faint line on his ring finger where a wedding band used to be, but he'd never mentioned it before. Do you want to talk about it? She asked, careful to keep her voice neutral. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did speak, his voice was low, meant only for her. We were trying to have kids. Found out I couldn't. Everything fell apart after that. Nova felt the weight of his confession settle in her chest. I'm sorry, she said, knowing the words were inadequate, but offering them anyway. It's been 3 years, he continued, tracing the rim of his cup with one calloused finger. Shaz shouldn't still feel like this. Some things don't follow a timeline, Nova said softly, thinking of her own parents, of phone calls that went unanswered and holidays spent alone. Healing isn't linear. He looked at her then, really looked at her, And Nova felt seen in a way that made her breath catch. "You sound like you know something about that." "Maybe I do." She glanced at the clock, still 15 minutes before the rush. "My parents, they had this whole life planned out for me. When I chose differently, it broke something between us. They saw it as rejection. I saw it as survival. Do you regret it?" The question was gentle, free of judgment. Nova considered this, rolling the thought around like a hard candy. "I regret the pain it caused them, but not the choice itself. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing, you know." Elijah nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes, like running into a burning vehicle to save a stranger. She laughed softly. "That was just stupid." "That was brave," he corrected, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. His fingers were warm from the coffee cup, rough from work, and the contact sent a current through her that had nothing to do with caffeine. The moment was interrupted by the bell above the door. Nova pulled her hand back, standing quickly. "And that's my cue." "Nova!" Elijah called as she turned to leave. She looked back at him. "Thank you." She knew he meant for more than just the coffee or the conversation. "Any time," she said, and meant it. The morning rush came and went, but something had shifted between them. Nova found herself sharing more during their brief interactions, telling him about the design sketches she still drew late at night, about the dreams she hadn't quite given up on. In return, he began leaving his notebook open when she approached, letting her glimpse the words he wrote in the quiet hours before dawn. One particularly busy morning, she was rushing between tables when she noticed he'd left something behind. The notebook lay forgotten on his table, its pages slightly ruffled by the ceiling fan. Nova slipped it into her apron pocket, planning to return it the next day. That night, in the quiet of her small apartment, she sat cross-legged on her bed and opened the notebook. She told herself she would only look at one page, just to make sure it was his. But the words caught her, pulled her in like a current. In the spaces between words, where silence grows thick as Georgia heat, I find myself watching her hands as she pours coffee, wondering if she knows she's teaching me how to wake up again. Nova closed the notebook quickly, her heart hammering. These weren't song lyrics or random thoughts. They were poems. About her. About them. About mornings filled with coffee and careful conversations. About healing and hope and things too fragile to name. She stayed up late that night, sitting at her small kitchen table with her own sketchbook open. For the first time in months, her pencil moved across the paper with purpose. She drew a space she saw in her mind. A cafe with large windows and comfortable booths. Walls decorated with local art. A counter where people could sit and talk and heal in the spaces between words. In the corner of the sketch, she wrote a title, Second Chance's Coffee House. The next morning, Elijah arrived earlier than usual. Nova handed him his notebook without comment, but slipped her sketch between its pages. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and she felt that same electric current run through her. "I added something," she said quietly, "for your collection." He opened the notebook and found the sketch. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the details, lingering on the title. When he looked up at her, there was something new in his expression, something that looked a lot like hope. "It's beautiful," he said, and she knew he meant more than just the drawing. "Well," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the symphony her heart was playing in her chest, "maybe some dreams are worth waiting for." The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, painting everything in shades of gold. Outside, the world was waking up, but inside, in the quiet space they'd created, Nova and Elijah were already wide awake, discovering that sometimes the best stories aren't written in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the gentle accumulation of shared breaths, borrowed words, and returned notebooks. And in the margins of their lives, something new was taking root, growing quietly but steadily, like poetry written in invisible ink, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The first time Nova rode in Elijah's delivery van, it was raining again. She'd finished her morning shift at Jerry's, only to find her car refusing to start in the parking lot. Elijah had watched her failed attempts through the diner window, before quietly gathering his things and walking out to join her. "Let me give you a ride," he said, rain dotting his grey t-shirt. Nova hesitated, keys dangling from her fingers. "I don't want to mess up your route. I own the company," he reminded her, with that almost smile she'd grown so fond of. "I make the routes." The inside of his van smelled like coffee and leather, with a hint of the industrial cleaner he'd used to erase all traces of the accident. Nova settled into the passenger seat, noticing how he'd cleared away the usual paperwork and coffee cups that normally occupied it. "I have a few deliveries to make," he said, turning the key in the ignition. "If you don't mind the company." She didn't mind. In fact, as they wound their way through back roads and small towns, Nova found herself relaxing into a rhythm she didn't know she'd been missing. Elijah drove with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything, deliberate, careful, but with an underlying strength that made her feel secure. "Tell me about your dreams," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence they'd fallen into. "Not the cafe one, the others, the ones you haven't shared yet." Nova watched raindrops race down her window, considering his question. "I always wanted to travel," she admitted. "Not tourist stuff, but really travel. See how people live in different places, how they make spaces their own. Learn from that. Where would you go first?" "Jamaica," she said without hesitation, "where my parents came from. I've never been, but I grew up hearing stories. The way they describe the colors, the light," she trailed off, realizing she was gesturing with her hands the way she did when she got excited about something. But Elijah was nodding, eyes on the road, but attention fully on her words. "You want to understand your roots? I want to understand everything," she corrected. "How people build homes and lives and meaning. How they make beauty out of whatever they have." He glanced at her then, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "You already do that," he said softly. The van pulled up to a small warehouse, and Elijah shifted into park. "First delivery," he announced, but neither of them moved to get out. Rain drummed on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Nova became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way his hand rested on the gear shift, just inches from her knee. "I should help," she said, reaching for her door handle. "No," he said quickly, then softer. "Stay dry. I'll be right back." She watched through the rain-streaked windshield as he unloaded boxes, his movements efficient and practiced. A strand of hair had fallen across his forehead, and she felt an overwhelming urge to brush it back. When he returned, he brought the scent of rain with him. Water dripped from his hair onto his shoulders, and without thinking, Nova reached out and wiped a drop from his cheek. The moment her fingers touched his skin, everything shifted. Elijah caught her hand before she could pull it back, holding it against his face for a heartbeat longer than necessary. His skin was cool from the rain, but warming quickly under her touch. "Nova," he breathed her name like a prayer. She leaned in first, or maybe he did. Later, neither would be sure who closed that final distance. The kiss was gentle, tentative, tasting of rain and coffee and possibility. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers tangling in the curls that had escaped her bun. When they pulled apart, Nova kept her eyes closed for a moment, trying to memorize every detail. The sound of rain, the warmth of his hand still curved around her neck, the way her heart seemed to be dancing in her chest. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Elijah confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "What took you so long?" she asked, opening her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "So I needed to be sure," he said, thumb tracing circles on her neck. "Sure that I was ready, sure that you were real." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. Nova knew what he meant, how sometimes happiness felt like a trap, how letting yourself want something meant risking loss all over again. "I'm real," she assured him, taking his free hand and pressing it against her heart. "Feel that." "Very real," he smiled then, a full genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Yes, you are." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of deliveries and stolen glances. They talked about everything and nothing, favorite books, childhood memories, the best places to get pizza at 2 a.m. Between stops, Elijah would reach for her hand, as if reassuring himself she was still there. At one warehouse, while he was inside, Nova found his notebook tucked in the side pocket of her door. A new entry caught her eye. "She speaks in colors I thought I'd forgotten, paints possibilities in the air between us, and I remember what it means to want something more than survival." The words made her throat tight with emotion. On the blank page opposite his poem, she quickly sketched the view through the van's windshield. Rain-blurred streets, steam rising from warm pavement, the way light filtered through clouds to create patches of gold on wet asphalt. In the corner, she wrote, "Sometimes the best views aren't from windows, but through windshields with you." When Elijah returned and found her closing his notebook, he didn't ask what she'd seen or added. He simply took her hand again, bringing it to his lips in a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. The final delivery took them to a small bookstore on the outskirts of town. While Elijah unloaded boxes of new releases, Nova wandered the aisles, trailing her fingers along spines of books about architecture and design. She found herself in front of a travel section, staring at a guide to Jamaica. "Buy it!" Elijah's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him watching her with that same intense expression. "What?" "The book. Buy it. Start planning. Dreams need foundations too." Nova looked at the book, then back at him. "You know what's funny? For the first time in a long time, I'm not in a hurry to be somewhere else." He stepped closer, tucking a curl behind her ear. "Good," he said simply, "because I'd like you to stay right here for a while." The rain had stopped by the time they left the bookstore, but Nova had bought the guide anyway. It sat between them on the drive back to her car, a promise of future adventures. The air was heavy with the aftermath of the storm, thick with the scent of wet earth and new possibilities. As they pulled into Jerry's parking lot, Nova realized something had changed fundamentally in the space of one morning. She'd stepped into his van as someone drifting between jobs and dreams, and she was stepping out as someone anchored, not by chains or obligations, but by choice, by connection. "Tomorrow?" Elijah asked as she gathered her things. "Tomorrow," she confirmed, leaning across the console to kiss him once more, quick and sweet. The Georgia sun was breaking through the clouds as she walked to her car, casting rainbow patterns through lingering raindrops. Nova touched her lips, still feeling the echo of his kiss, and smiled. Sometimes the best journeys weren't about going somewhere new, but about finding your way home. The first sign that something was different came on a Tuesday morning in late August. Nova had just started her shift at Jerry's when the smell of frying bacon, normally one of her favorite parts of opening the diner, hit her like a physical force. She barely made it to the employee bathroom before losing what little breakfast she'd managed to eat. "You okay, honey?" Mary, the older waitress who'd been working at Jerry's since before Nova was born, knocked softly on the door. "Fine," Nova called back, splashing cold water on her face. "Must have been something I ate." But it wasn't just that morning. Over the next week, certain smells began to affect her differently. Coffee, which had been her lifeblood through countless double shifts, now made her stomach turn. The industrial cleaner they used on the tables gave her headaches. Even Elijah's familiar scent of leather and motor oil, which she'd grown to love, sometimes became overwhelming. They were in his van one evening, parked at their favorite spot overlooking the town, when another wave of nausea hit her. Elijah had brought takeout from the new Italian place, a sweet gesture that her body apparently didn't appreciate. "Nova!" His voice was concerned as she pushed open the door, letting in the cool evening air. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said automatically, then reconsidered. They'd been together for almost 3 months now. She didn't need to pretend. "Just feeling a little off lately." Elijah's hand found her back, rubbing gentle circles. "So you've been off a lot this week. Maybe you should see a doctor." She leaned into his touch, grateful for the solid warmth of him. "It's probably just stress. The convenience store changed my schedule again, and with trying to save for design classes." But even as she said it, something nagged at the back of her mind. When was the last time she'd had her period? Between working double shifts and spending every free moment with Elijah, she'd lost track of days. "Shall let me help?" he said, misreading her sudden silence. "With the classes, I could—" "No," she cut him off gently. They'd had this conversation before. "I need to do this myself. You understand, right?" He did understand. It was one of the things she loved about him. Loved. The word echoed in her mind, both thrilling and terrifying. They hadn't said it yet, though she felt it in every careful touch, every shared silence, every time he left his notebook open for her to read. "At least let me drive you to the doctor," he persisted. "You shouldn't have to do everything alone anymore." Nova turned to look at him, really look at him. The setting sun painted his profile in shades of gold and shadow, highlighting the worry in his eyes. This man, who'd been so careful with his own heart, now offered pieces of it to her daily without reservation. "Okay," she agreed softly. "I'll call tomorrow." But tomorrow brought a new development. During her morning shift, Nova found herself having to sit down between orders, unusual fatigue weighing her limbs like lead. She dropped 2 plates, something she hadn't done since her first week on the job, and nearly burst into tears over a customer's simple request for more creamer. "Go home," Mary ordered, after finding Nova dozing in the break room. "Whatever this is, you need rest." Nova didn't argue. She called Elijah, who arrived within minutes despite being in the middle of his delivery route. The concern in his eyes when he saw her made something twist in her chest. "I'm taking you to urgent care," he said. No room for argument in his voice. "No, just take me home," she insisted. "I just need to sleep." He compromised by taking her to the 24-hour pharmacy instead. While he picked up various remedies, ginger ale, crackers, pain relievers, Nova found herself in the feminine care aisle, staring at a row of pregnancy tests. Her hands trembled as she picked one up, reading the back even though the words blurred together. It wasn't possible. Elijah couldn't. They had used protection, but still. "Found everything you need." His voice behind her made her jump. Nova quickly shoved the test into her pocket, not ready to share her suspicion. Not yet. "Yeah," she managed. "Let's go." At her apartment, Elijah insisted on getting her settled, making sure she had water within reach, adjusting her pillows, even offering to call the convenience store to cancel her evening shift. His careful attention made her throat tight with emotion. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Go finish your route." He hesitated, then leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Call me if you need anything. Promise?" "Promise." After he left, Nova sat on her bathroom floor, staring at the pregnancy test box for what felt like hours. Her hands shook as she finally opened it, following the instructions with meticulous care. 3 minutes. The box said to wait 3 minutes. She thought about Elijah's face when he talked about his divorce, about how the inability to have children had broken something fundamental in his marriage. She thought about her own parents, about bridges burned and expectations shattered. She thought about dreams of design school and travel, about sketches of cafes and possibilities. Time moved like molasses. Nova paced her small bathroom, counting tiles, reciting coffee orders in her head, anything to keep from looking at the test too soon. When 3 minutes had passed, she picked up the test with eyes closed, taking a deep breath before looking. 2 lines, clear and undeniable. Nova sat down hard on the edge of her bathtub, the test clutched in her trembling hands. Impossible things were happening in her body, in her life. A miracle was growing inside her and Elijah, who believed he could never. She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, feeling the weight of future conversations heavy on her shoulders. How would she tell him? How would he react? Would this be a beginning or an ending? Outside her bathroom window, the Georgia sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Nova thought about mornings in the diner, about poetry written in margins, about kisses that tasted like coffee and possibility. She thought about how life had a way of writing its own story, regardless of our careful plans. "Okay," she whispered to herself, to the tiny spark of life inside her, to the universe that seemed determined to rewrite everything she thought she knew. Okay, she would tell him tomorrow, or maybe the next day. For now, she just needed to sit with this knowledge, this miracle, this terrifying, wonderful thing that was about to change everything. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. "Feeling better?" Nova looked at the message for a long moment, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Getting there," she typed back. "Everything's going to be different now." She meant it as a private acknowledgement of her discovery, but his response made her eyes fill with tears. "Different can be good. We've proved that already." Nova set the phone down and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She was still Nova Collins, still the girl who left her parents' store to chase bigger dreams, still the woman who pulled a stranger from a burning van. But now she was something more, something she never expected to be. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving her bathroom in soft twilight. In the growing darkness, Nova made a promise to herself, to Elijah, to the future taking shape inside her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. After all, they were already experts at making the impossible possible. For 3 days, Nova carried the secret like a bird in her chest, fluttering and restless. She took 2 more tests, just to be sure, both positive. She called a clinic, scheduled an appointment, and sat through a confirmation that made it all startlingly real. She was 6 weeks pregnant. But it wasn't until the ultrasound technician's eyes widened slightly that Nova learned the full scope of the miracle growing inside her. "Well," the technician said, adjusting the monitor, "looks like you've got 2 little ones in there." "2," Nova's voice came out as a whisper. "Twins," the technician confirmed, pointing to 2 distinct shapes on the screen, both measuring right on track. Nova left the clinic clutching a small envelope containing ultrasound photos, her mind spinning. Twins. The word echoed in her head like a bell, each ring bringing new waves of emotion. Joy, terror, amazement, worry. She thought about Elijah, about his confession in the diner months ago, about the pain that still lingered in his eyes when he talked about his past. She had to tell him, but how do you tell a man who believes he can't have children that he's about to have two? That evening, she sat in her small apartment. The ultrasound photos spread out on her kitchen table like a hand of cards that would change everything. Her sketchbook lay open beside them, pages filled with new drawings, a nursery with 2 cribs, a rocking chair by a window, tiny matching outfits hung on a line. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. "Miss you, dinner tomorrow." Nova's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't news for a text message. Wasn't news for a casual dinner either. This was everything. "Can we meet tonight?" she typed back. "Your workshop?" The workshop was their special place. Behind his main office, the converted garage was where Elijah worked on his vehicles, where they'd shared countless conversations over coffee and engine parts. It was where she'd first shown him her cafe designs, where he'd first read her his poetry out loud. Of course. "Everything okay. Just need to see you." The drive to his workshop felt both too long and too short. Nova rehearsed different ways to tell him, each version sounding inadequate in her head. How do you put a miracle into words? Elijah was waiting outside when she pulled up, leaning against the workshop door in his usual grey t-shirt and jeans. The sight of him, so familiar, so dear, made her heart clench. Everything about him was about to change. "Hey," he said softly as she approached. His eyes searched her face, concern evident in his expression. "You've been quiet lately." Nova nodded, unable to find words yet. He led her into the workshop, where the scent of motor oil and metal mixed with the cooling evening air. A small desk in the corner held his ever-present notebook, open to a fresh page. "Talk to me," he said, turning to face her. "So whatever it is, we'll figure it out." She pulled the envelope from her purse with trembling hands. "I need to show you something." Elijah took the envelope, his expression curious. Nova watched as he opened it, as he pulled out the ultrasound photos. She saw the exact moment understanding hit him, saw it in the way his hands began to shake, in the sharp intake of breath, in the color draining from his face. "Nova." Her name came out broken, questioning. "There's more," she said softly, stepping closer. "Look at the images carefully. There are two." "Two," he whispered, sinking onto a nearby stool. "Twins," she confirmed, her own voice trembling. "They're healthy, perfect, and they're yours. Elijah. Ours." He stared at the photos for what felt like hours, his fingers tracing the shapes on the paper as if he could reach through and touch the tiny lives captured there. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes were filled with tears. "But I can't," he started. "But you did," she interrupted gently. "The doctors were wrong, or something changed, or the universe decided to prove that impossible things happen every day." Elijah stood suddenly, pulling her into his arms with such force it lifted her feet off the ground. She felt his tears against her neck, felt the way his body shook with emotion. "Twins," he breathed against her skin. "Two miracles." Nova wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on as tightly as she dared. "Are you happy?" she whispered, needing to hear it. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the joy in his eyes took her breath away. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said. I'm terrified and amazed and overwhelmed and—" He pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you. I should have said it weeks ago, but I love you, Nova Collins." The words she'd been holding back burst free. "I love you too." They stood there in the fading light, holding each other while the world shifted and reformed around them. Elijah's hand found its way to her stomach, spreading wide as if he could already feel the lives growing there. "Two babies," he marveled. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should you be standing?" "Maybe you should sit down." Nova laughed through her tears. "I'm fine, we're all fine." He guided her to sit anyway, kneeling in front of her with his hand still on her stomach. "Tell me everything. When did you find out? What did the doctors say? Are you eating enough? Sleeping enough?" She told him everything about the nausea, the fatigue, the tests, the doctor's visit. He listened with rapt attention, asking questions, making mental notes. When she mentioned morning sickness, he immediately started planning how to adjust her work schedule. When she talked about the fatigue, he began listing ways to make her life easier. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. Nova blinked. "What?" "Move in with me. My house is closer to the diner. You won't have to commute so far. There's plenty of room for the babies." "For us?" "For everything." She looked at him. This man who'd spent years believing he couldn't have children, now planning a future for 4 with absolute certainty. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said, "except loving you." Nova touched his face, feeling the slight stubble under her fingers. "Okay," she said simply. Elijah's smile could have lit up the whole town. He pulled his notebook closer, flipping to a blank page. "I will need to start planning nursery designs. You can do those. I'll handle the renovations. We should pick names." "Slow down," Nova laughed. "We have time." He looked up at her, eyes shining. "Do you know what this means? What you've given me?" She did know. She could see it in every line of his face, every tremor in his hands, every word he wrote in his notebook. This wasn't just about babies or family or future. This was about redemption, about second chances, about life proving that the end of one dream could be the beginning of something even more beautiful. Outside, the Georgia night was settling in, crickets starting their evening symphony. Inside the workshop, surrounded by tools and engine parts and the remnants of their separate lives, Nova and Elijah began planning their shared future. He wrote while she drew, their free hands intertwined, both of them marveling at how the universe had brought them together in a burning van on a rainy night, only to give them not one miracle, but 3. Love, found in the spaces between words, hope, rebuilt from the ashes of past pain, and 2 tiny hearts, beating in perfect synchronization, proving that sometimes the most impossible dreams are the ones that come true. Moving in with Elijah happened gradually, like a slow sunrise. Nova brought pieces of herself to his house, one box at a time, her sketchbooks, her collection of design magazines, the small potted herbs she'd kept alive on her apartment windowsill. Each item found its place in his space, transforming it from his house into their home. His house sat on the outskirts of town, a modest 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and more character than curb appeal. The previous owners had painted it a soft blue that reminded Nova of early morning sky. It needed work. The porch steps creaked, the kitchen cabinets stuck in humid weather, and the upstairs bathroom faucet had a mysterious mind of its own, but it felt right. On a warm September morning, Nova stood in what would become the nursery, morning sickness finally giving her a brief reprieve. The room had good bones, large windows that let in plenty of natural light, original hardwood floors under the worn carpet, and enough space for 2 cribs, a changing table, and the rocking chair Elijah had already started refinishing in his workshop. "What do you think?" Elijah asked from the doorway, 2 mugs in his hands, ginger tea for her, coffee for him. Nova accepted the tea gratefully. "I think it's perfect. The light in here," she gestured to the way the sun painted patterns on the wall. "We could do something with that. Maybe a mural." He moved behind her, wrapping his free arm around her waist to rest his hand on her still flat stomach. At 8 weeks, there was nothing to feel yet, but he took every opportunity to touch her there, as if reassuring himself it was all real. "Whatever you want," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is your canvas." She leaned back against him, taking in the quiet moment. These moments had become precious. Soon she would have to tell Jerry she was pregnant, would have to cut back her hours at both jobs. And then there was the harder conversation waiting, telling her parents. As if reading her thoughts, Elijah squeezed her gently. "We should tell them." Nova sighed. "I know. I don't know how." "Together," he said simply. "We'll do it together." She turned in his arms to face him. "They might not react well. They haven't spoken to me in 3 years." "Elijah, not really. Holiday cards and 2-minute phone calls don't count." "Then it's time for that to change." His voice was firm but gentle. "These babies deserve to know their grandparents, and you deserve to have your family back." Nova touched his face, feeling the familiar scratch of his morning stubble. "You're my family now." "Yes," he agreed, turning to kiss her palm. "But there's room for more love in this story. You taught me that." Later that afternoon, Nova sat at their kitchen table with her phone in hand, staring at her parents' number. Elijah worked quietly nearby, installing new handles on the sticky cabinets, his presence a steady comfort. Taking a deep breath, she pressed dial. The phone rang 3 times before her mother's voice answered. "Hello? Mama," Nova said softly. "It's me." There was a pause, filled with 3 years of distance. Then, "Nova, is everything okay?" "Yes, no, I mean..." Nova looked at Elijah, who had stopped working to watch her with encouraging eyes. "I need to tell you and Dad something. Can we come over?" Another pause. "We, me and someone important." Someone you should meet. Her mother's voice softened slightly. When? Tomorrow, after the store closes. Okay. A hesitation. Then, Nova? Yes? I miss you. The words hit her like a physical force, bringing tears to her eyes. I miss you too, Mama. After hanging up, Nova let out a shaky breath. Elijah was there immediately, pulling her into his arms. Step one, he murmured into her hair. What if they don't approve? What if they think this is just another mistake, like leaving the store? Then we'll prove them wrong, day by day, choice by choice. He pulled back to look at her. But Nova, I don't think they'll see this as a mistake. I think they'll see what I see. A strong woman who knows her own heart, building a life on her own terms. She managed a watery smile. When did you get so wise? Around the time a beautiful waitress pulled me from a burning van and turned my whole world upside down. That evening, they worked on the nursery together. Elijah pulled up the old carpet while Nova sketched design ideas. They talked about colors and themes, about whether to find out the baby's genders, about names they liked and ones they definitely didn't. What about a nature theme? Nova suggested, showing him a sketch of tree branches stretching across the walls, dotted with stars. Something that grows with them. Elijah studied the drawing, his expression soft. It's beautiful, like a forest at night. With constellations, she added, pointing to the star patterns, so they'll always know how to find their way home. He pulled her close, hand finding its way to her stomach again. They'll always know home, he promised, because they'll have you for a mother. That night, lying in bed, Nova listened to Elijah's steady breathing beside her. His notebook lay open on the nightstand, and in the dim light from the window, she could make out his latest entry. In this house of creaking floors and sticky doors, we build new constellations, mapping love across morning sickness and midnight fears. 2 hearts beating beneath your heart, teaching me that home isn't always a place you find. Sometimes it's a place you build, heartbeat by heartbeat, star by star. Nova placed her hand over her stomach, imagining the tiny lives growing there. Tomorrow they would face her parents, would begin the hard work of mending broken bridges. But tonight, in this room, in this house that was becoming home, she felt at peace. Outside, crickets sang their evening songs, and a warm breeze carried the scent of late summer through the open window. Nova closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the moment, the sound of Elijah's breathing, the soft sheets against her skin, the infinite possibilities stretching out before them like stars. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was exactly where she needed to be. Home, in every sense of the word, building a future one room, one heartbeat, one constellation at a time. The imported goods store looked exactly as Nova remembered it, the faded blue awning, the hand-painted window signs, the bell above the door that chimed in a particular way she'd never heard anywhere else. But standing there now, Elijah's hand steady in hers, it felt both smaller and larger than in her memories. "Ready?" he asked softly. Nova nodded, though her heart was doing somersaults. The closed sign hung in the window, but warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. She could see movement inside, her mother's silhouette arranging something on a shelf, her father's broader shape behind the counter. The bell's familiar chime announced their entrance. Her mother turned first, a tin of cookies still in her hands. Nova watched emotions flash across her face, surprise, concern, a flicker of hope. "Nova," her mother breathed, setting down the tin with trembling hands. Her father emerged from behind the counter, his face unreadable. 3 years of distance hung between them like a heavy curtain. "Mama, Dad," Nova managed, squeezing Elijah's hand for strength. "There, this is Elijah Monroe." Elijah stepped forward, his presence solid and reassuring. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins, thank you for having us." Her father's eyes moved between them, lingering on their joined hands. "You own the transportation company," he said, surprising Nova. "Your trucks deliver to our suppliers." Elijah nodded. "Yes, sir. Though that's not how I met your daughter." "How did you meet?" her mother asked, moving closer, eyes drinking in every detail of Nova's face as if making up for lost time. Nova took a deep breath. He needed saving. The story spilled out then, the rainy night, the accident, the aftermath. Nova watched her parents, expressions shift as she spoke, saw worry and pride war in their eyes. When she described pulling Elijah from the burning van, her mother pressed a hand to her heart. "Always so brave," she whispered, "even as a little girl." Tears pricked at Nova's eyes. "Mama." "Come," her mother said suddenly, gesturing to the back room. I made callaloo, your favorite. The back room had been their family dining room for as long as Nova could remember. The small table where they'd shared thousands of meals still stood in the corner, now set for four. The familiar scent of Caribbean spices filled the air, bringing memories rushing back. They settled around the table, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Nova's mother served the food, callaloo, rice and peas, fried plantains, while her father studied Elijah with careful eyes. You love her? He asked abruptly. Dad, Nova started, but Elijah touched her knee under the table. Yes, sir, he said, his voice clear and certain. More than I thought possible. Her father nodded slowly. Good, she deserves that. Nova felt tears threatening again. There's more, she said quietly. Something else we need to tell you. Her mother paused, spoon halfway to her mouth, her father's hand stilled on his fork. I'm pregnant, Nova said, the words hanging in the air like delicate glass. With twins. The spoon clattered against her mother's bowl. Her father's chair scraped back as he stood abruptly, walking to the window. Nova's heart pounded in her chest. Twins, her mother whispered. Nova nodded, reaching for Elijah's hand again. 8 weeks. They're healthy. Perfect. Her father turned back from the window, and Nova was stunned to see tears in his eyes. 2 babies. His voice was rough with emotion. Yes, Elijah said softly. A miracle. 2, actually. Nova's mother stood then, moving around the table with purpose. Before Nova could react, she was enveloped in her mother's arms, surrounded by the familiar scent of nutmeg and vanilla that had always clung to her clothes. My baby is having babies, her mother breathed, rocking her slightly. Nova broke then, tears flowing freely. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I... No, her father's voice cut in. He had moved to stand beside them. We're sorry. We should have supported your dreams, not just our own. He reached out, hesitating only briefly before pulling both Nova and her mother into his arms. Nova felt Elijah stand, preparing to give them privacy, but her father's voice stopped him. You too, son, he said gruffly. You're family now. Elijah joined their embrace, and for a moment they stood together, 3 years of pain and distance dissolving in tears and touches and whispered apologies. When they finally settled back at the table, the food had grown cold, but no one seemed to mind. Nova's mother asked about the babies, about their plans, about the house. Her father and Elijah discussed business, finding common ground in their shared understanding of supply chains and customer service. You'll need help, her mother said suddenly. With the babies, 2 at once. It's not easy. We'd like that, Nova said softly. We want them to know their grandparents, to know where they come from. Her father cleared his throat. The apartment upstairs, we never rented it after you left. It's still furnished, for when you need breaks, or help with the little ones. Nova looked around the room, at her mother's hopeful smile, her father's tentative offering, Elijah's quiet support. This place that had felt like a cage 3 years ago now felt like something else. A foundation, a root system, a place to grow from rather than escape from. Later that night, after promises of Sunday dinners and prenatal vitamins her mother swore by, after tears and hugs and plans for tomorrow, Nova and Elijah stood outside the store. The Georgia night was warm and thick with possibility. Okay? Elijah asked, pulling her close. Nova looked up at the apartment window above the store, then at their joined hands, then at the street stretching out before them, leading to their home, their future, their own little family. More than okay, she said. I think this is what healing feels like. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, tasting of her mother's cooking and forgiveness and hope. Above them, stars pierced the city's glow, marking their place in the universe, not lost anymore, but found, not broken, but mending, not alone, but surrounded by love that had only been waiting for the right moment to bloom again. The store's bell chimed one last time as her parents locked up for the night. Nova listened to its familiar song and smiled, realizing that sometimes going home didn't mean going backward. Sometimes it meant finding a new way forward, with more hearts beating in time, more hands to hold, more love than any one path could contain. Ready to go home? Elijah asked. Nova took his hand, feeling their baby's future stretching out before them like a road made of starlight. Yes, she said. Let's go home. By the 6th month of pregnancy, Nova's body had become a landscape of miracles and challenges. Her belly grew more pronounced each week, housing their twin boys, a revelation that had brought Elijah to happy tears during the ultrasound. She'd finally had to leave both jobs, accepting that carrying 2 babies while working on her feet wasn't sustainable. Instead, she channeled her energy into transforming their house into a home. The nursery walls now bore the forest scene she'd envisioned, painted over several weeks with Elijah's help. Dark trees stretched upward, their branches intertwining against a backdrop of deep blue, while metallic paint created constellations that caught the light like real stars. "It's missing something," Nova mused one afternoon, standing in the doorway with her hands resting on her growing belly. The babies were active today, performing what felt like synchronized swimming routines. Elijah looked up from where he was assembling the second crib. They'd chosen matching wooden ones in a warm cherry finish. "What's missing?" Nova walked into the room, her movements slower now, more deliberate. "I'm not sure. It needs life, movement." Her mother, who had become a constant and welcome presence in their lives, appeared behind them with a tray of ginger tea and cookies. "In Jamaica," she said, setting the tray on the window seat they'd installed, "we used to hang wind chimes in the nursery. For good dreams." Nova turned to her mother, eyes bright. "That's it. Not just wind chimes, but—" She grabbed her sketchbook from the changing table, quickly drawing as she spoke. Little wooden animals, hanging at different heights, bears, foxes, rabbits, all the forest creatures dancing in the breeze. Elijah moved to look over her shoulder, one hand automatically finding its way to her belly. One of the twins kicked against his palm, making him smile. "I can make those," he said, "in the workshop." "Really?" Nova looked up at him. "My grandfather taught me wood carving. Haven't done it in years." "But—" He kissed her temple. "If for our boys, I'll remember." That evening, Nova sat in the workshop watching Elijah work. He'd cleared a special space for her, a comfortable chair with good back support, positioned where she could see him, but stay safely away from any dust or fumes. The steady sound of his carving tools mixed with the whir of the shop's fan and the distant chorus of cicadas. "Tell me about your grandfather," she said, sketching as she watched him shape a small wooden bear. Elijah's hands stayed steady on the wood, but his eyes grew distant with memory. He was a quiet man, taught more by showing than telling. Every Saturday, I'd go to his workshop behind the house, and we'd just create things. He said working with wood was like having a conversation with time itself. "What do you mean?" He held up the half-finished bear. "Each piece of wood has its own story. The years it grew, the storms it weathered, the sun it absorbed. When you carve it, you're not just shaping wood. You're revealing the story that was always there, waiting to be found." Nova smiled, running a hand over her belly. Like us," he agreed softly. The next few weeks fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began with Nova's mother bringing breakfast to the house, traditional Caribbean dishes modified to help with Nova's cravings and morning sickness. Afternoons found Nova working on designs for the cafe she still dreamed of opening, now modified to include a special corner for children. Her father had begun stopping by regularly too, often bringing building supplies or helping Elijah with house projects. The 2 men developed an easy rapport, bonding over their shared love of working with their hands and their protective instincts toward Nova. One Sunday evening, after a family dinner that had become weekly tradition, Nova's father pulled her aside. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "The store's back room, the storage space, it's bigger than we need now. With some work, it could be what, Dad?" "A cafe," he said simply. "Your cafe, connected to the store, but your own space, your own dream." Nova stared at him, tears filling her eyes. "But the store will still be there, but maybe it's time for it to grow like our family is growing." He looked at her belly, then back at her face. "You were right, all those years ago. Sometimes holding too tight means losing what matters most." She hugged him then awkwardly because of her belly, but with all the love she could express. "Thank you, Dad." That night, lying in bed with Elijah, Nova told him about her father's offer. "What do you think?" she asked, watching his face in the dim light. "I think," he said, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her, "that your father is a wise man who knows a good investment when he sees one. But is it the right time? With the twins coming, the right time finds us, love. We just have to be brave enough to recognize it." He placed his hand on her belly, smiling as one of the boys kicked in response. "Besides, think about it. A cafe connected to your parents' and store. It's perfect. The babies will grow up there like you did, but this time it'll be a place of choice, not obligation." Nova closed her eyes, imagining it. The smell of coffee mixing with Caribbean spices, her mother teaching the twins about their heritage while they sat at the cafe counter, her father showing them how to work with their hands while telling stories of the island he'd left for love. "I will need a name for it," she mused. Elijah reached for his notebook on the nightstand, flipping to a blank page. "Let's make a list." They spent the next hour suggesting names, laughing at the worst ones, considering the best. Finally, Nova sat up as much as she could manage. "I've got it," she said. "Second Star Cafe." "Like in Peter Pan?" Elijah asked. "Like the constellations in the nursery," she corrected. "Like finding your way home." "Like second chances." Elijah wrote it down, then added beneath it, "In this space between what was and what will be, we plant new seeds in old soil, watching dreams take root beside family trees that grow not up, but out, branching into futures we never dared imagine." Nova felt the twins move, as if responding to their father's words. Outside, a warm breeze carried the promise of spring, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled, not threatening but cleansing, like nature herself was clearing the way for new beginnings. "Everything's changing," she whispered. Elijah put down his notebook and gathered her close. "Everything already has." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, their boys dancing beneath her heart, while the Georgia night sang lullabies of rain and renewal, of roots growing deeper, of dreams taking new shapes in the fertile soil of love rediscovered and family rebuilt. The night the twins decided to make their early arrival, Georgia was caught in the grip of an unseasonable storm. Nova stood at the nursery window, watching lightning illuminate the sky in brilliant flashes. She was 7.5 months pregnant, and something felt different. "Elijah," she called, one hand pressed against her lower back. He appeared in the doorway immediately. He'd been especially attentive since she'd started having Braxton Hicks contractions the week before. "What is it?" "Something's—" She stopped, feeling a sharp pain ripple through her. This wasn't like the practice contractions. This was real. "We need to go now." The next few minutes passed in a blur of focused activity. Elijah grabbed the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago, called her parents, and helped her down the stairs. But when they opened the front door, they found the driveway flooded with several inches of water. "The van," Nova said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. "We need the van." Elijah hesitated for a split second, and Nova knew he was thinking about the accident where they'd met. But then he nodded, determination settling over his features. "Hold on, love. We're going to make it." The van, not the one from the accident, but its replacement, sat higher off the ground than their regular car. Elijah helped her in, then ran around to the driver's side. The engine roared to life just as another contraction gripped her. "They're too close together," she gasped, looking at the clock. 5 minutes apart already. Elijah navigated carefully through the flooded streets, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Talk to me," he said, clearly trying to keep her focused. "Remember when we picked their names?" Nova smiled despite the pain. They'd spent weeks debating names, wanting something meaningful, but not pretentious, strong, but gentle. "River and Rain," she said softly, "because they came from impossible waters, and because their mother pulled their father from a storm," Elijah added, reaching for her hand. A particularly strong contraction made Nova cry out. She felt something shift, something change. "Elijah, I think they're coming now." He glanced at her sharply, then at the road ahead where water had made the highway impassable. Making a quick decision, he turned the van around. "Hold on, love. Change of plans." Through the haze of pain, Nova realized where they were heading. "The workshop. It's closer. It's on higher ground, and I've got medical supplies there for emergencies." His voice was steady, but she could hear the undercurrent of fear. "I already called your parents. Your mother's bringing the midwife she's been consulting with." Another contraction hit, stronger than before. "And I don't think we have time to wait." They reached the workshop just as Nova's water broke. Elijah carried her inside, to the office area, where he'd set up a comfortable couch for her pregnancy rests. The familiar smell of wood and metal was oddly comforting. "Your mum's 10 minutes out," he said, checking his phone. "Can you hold on?" Nova shook her head, tears mixing with sweat. "They're coming now." "Elijah." "I'm scared." He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Look at me, Nova. You pulled me from a burning van. You rebuilt bridges with your family. You carry 2 miracles inside you that doctors said were impossible. You are the strongest person I know, and we're going to do this together." Thunder crashed outside as Nova pushed for the first time. Elijah moved with practiced efficiency, laying out clean towels, gathering supplies, all while keeping one hand connected to her. "I see ahead," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Nova, my love, one more push." River came into the world with a powerful cry, just as lightning illuminated the workshop through its high windows. Elijah worked quickly, clearing the baby's airways, wrapping him in a clean towel, placing him on Nova's chest. "Hello, little storm chaser," Nova whispered, but another contraction interrupted the moment. Rain arrived 4 minutes later, smaller than his brother, but with equally strong lungs. As Elijah placed their second son beside his brother on Nova's chest, the workshop door burst open. Nova's mother rushed in with the midwife, both of them soaked from the storm. They found Nova propped up on the couch, crying and laughing at once, while Elijah knelt beside them, one hand on each tiny head, tears streaming down his face. "Oh, my loves," her mother breathed, taking in the scene. The midwife quickly checked both babies and Nova, confirming what they already knew in their hearts. Everyone was healthy, if early. "These boys were determined to make an entrance," she said with a smile. Nova's father arrived moments later with dry blankets and the emergency supplies they'd stored at the store. He stopped in the doorway, overcome by the sight of his grandsons. "They're perfect," he managed finally. And they were. River, with Elijah's blue eyes and Nova's dark curls. Rain, smaller but fiercer, with a grip that already spoke of determination. Both of them miracles. Both of them carrying pieces of all the love that had brought them into being. Hours later, after the midwife had overseen their transfer to the hospital, after tests confirmed the twins were healthy, despite their early arrival, Nova lay in her hospital bed watching Elijah with their sons. He sat in the window seat, a baby in each arm, talking to them softly. "And that's how I met your mother. She saved my life on a night just like the one you chose for your arrival. Some people call it coincidence, but I call it destiny, because sometimes the best stories start in storms." Nova closed her eyes, listening to his voice blend with the distant thunder. On her bedside table, Elijah's notebook lay open to a fresh entry. "In this room of first breaths and tiny fingers, where miracles come in pairs and love multiplies with each heartbeat, I finally understand what my grandfather meant about conversations with time. Some stories are written in the stars, some in the spaces between raindrops, but the best ones, the ones that change everything, are written in the courage of a woman who stops on stormy nights, in the cry of babies born in workshops, in the endless circle of family coming home to itself, again and again, in new ways, in perfect time." Outside, the storm was passing. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, a new day rising to greet their expanded family. Nova looked at her sons, at their father, at the life they'd built from the ashes of what they'd thought were endings. "We did it," she whispered. Elijah looked up, his eyes filled with more love than she'd ever thought possible. "No, my love, we're just beginning." And in that moment, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the soft breathing of their miracle twins, Nova knew he was right. Every ending was just a different kind of beginning. Every storm carried the seeds of something beautiful. And sometimes, the most impossible dreams were the ones that came true in ways you never expected, delivered by rain, guided by stars, and cradled in the hearts of those who never stopped believing in second chances. 1 year later, the Second Star Cafe buzzed with afternoon energy. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, catching the metallic constellations painted on the deep blue walls, an echo of the nursery that had started it all. The connecting door to her parents' store stood open, allowing the mingled scents of coffee and Caribbean spices to create something entirely new. Nova moved between tables, no longer serving but greeting customers and checking on her staff. Her design touches were everywhere. Comfortable booths with high backs for privacy, a children's corner with wooden animals carved by Elijah hanging from the ceiling, local art displayed on rotating walls. In their favorite corner, Elijah sat with the twins in their custom-built high chairs, another creation from his workshop. River, the bigger of the two now, was attempting to grab his father's notebook, while Rain focused intently on stacking wooden blocks. "And your boys are growing so fast," Mary, her old colleague from Jerry's, commented as she picked up her weekly coffee order. "Too fast," Nova agreed, watching as Elijah caught River's hand just before it could tear a page. "But perfectly." The cafe had opened 3 months ago, After extensive renovations that had turned her father's storage room into something magical, the whole family had helped. Her father handling the construction, her mother managing logistics, Elijah spending every free moment working on custom furniture pieces. The twins had supervised it all from their playpen, their first words echoing off newly painted walls. River had said Dada first, while Rain had surprised them all by clearly announcing Star while pointing at the ceiling. Nova made her way to their corner, sliding into the booth beside Elijah. He immediately shifted to make room, a movement so natural it seemed choreographed. After a year of marriage, they'd had a small ceremony in the workshop when the twins were 3 months old. They'd developed a rhythm that felt like dancing. "What are you writing?" she asked, peeking at his notebook. The next chapter," he said with a smile, showing her the page. "In this space between dreams and reality, where coffee meets spice and stars paint stories on walls, our boys grow like wildflowers, untamed, unexpected, perfect. River with his storm chaser spirit, Rain carrying quiet thunder in his smile, both of them teaching us daily that the best kind of love is the kind that grows beyond all possible boundaries." Nova touched the words gently, then looked at their sons, River now attempting to share his snack with his brother, Rain accepting with his usual serious expression. They were mirror images and complete opposites, just like the storms they were named for. "Did you ever think," she asked, leaning her head on Elijah's shoulder, "that night in the rain that we'd end up here?" "No," he admitted, wrapping an arm around her. "I didn't think I'd end up anywhere at all. But then this beautiful waitress pulled me from a burning van, and the rest is written in the stars," she teased, "and in coffee rings, and in wooden animals, and in the way River laughs like you, and in how Rain concentrates like me when he's building something." He kissed her temple. "It's written everywhere, if you know how to look." Through the open door, they could hear her mother singing an old Caribbean lullaby to a fussy Rain, while her father showed River how to help with inventory, mostly just counting the same tin of cookies over and over. Their extended family had grown too, regular customers who became friends, old colleagues who supported the new venture, even Jerry himself, who still claimed his coffee was more dangerous. Nova looked around at the life they'd built, not just the cafe or the house or their growing family, but the love that seemed to expand endlessly, making room for all the dreams yet to come. "What's next?" she asked, though she already knew. The second location plans were sketched in her notebook, and Elijah's workshop had started producing furniture for other cafes. Their roots were deep now, but their branches kept reaching higher. Elijah smiled, that same smile that had first caught her heart on a rainy night that felt like a lifetime ago. "Everything," he said simply. "Everything is next." Above them, wooden animals danced in the afternoon breeze, casting shadows that looked like stars across their families' laughing faces. And in that moment, Nova knew with absolute certainty that some stories never really end. They just keep growing, like love, like family, like dreams, that refuse to be bound by what seems possible. After all, the best stories are the ones written in starlight and storm clouds, in coffee rings and crayon marks, in the spaces between what was and what could be. They're written in the courage to pull over on rainy nights, in the strength to build bridges across broken places, and in the faith that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones we never saw coming. They're written in the stars, yes, but more importantly, they're written in our hearts, one impossible miracle at a time. The end. Thinking of Nova and Elijah, who found love and built a family through a moment that could have been tragic. His dark brown hair, now touched with silver at the temples, contrasted sharply with the paleness of his skin. 3 months had passed since the accident. 3 months of stillness, of waiting, of a world moving on without him. Dr. Anderson stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing charts with practiced efficiency. "His vitals are improving," she noted to the nurse beside her. "We might see changes soon." Brenda Elise Carter nodded, her dark eyes studying the patient's face with professional concern. As the head nurse assigned to his case, she'd spent countless hours in this room, monitoring, caring, watching for any sign of consciousness. Her practical braids were pulled back neatly, and her comfortable yet professional attire spoke of someone who prioritized function over fashion. "I'll stay with him for a while," Brenda said, settling into the chair beside the bed. Dr. Anderson left, and the room fell into its familiar quiet, broken only by the rhythmic sounds of machinery. Brenda had learned much about Cassian Rhodes over these months, though they'd never spoken a word. She knew him from the news, of course, the successful business executive from Seattle, known for his razor-sharp deals and relentless work ethic. But she'd also learned about him from the steady decline in visitors, from the way his supposed friends gradually stopped coming, from how his fiancée's visits grew shorter and more infrequent until they ceased altogether. "You know," Brenda spoke softly, checking his IV line, "sometimes I think we learn more about people when they're silent than when they're speaking." She adjusted his blanket with practiced care. "Your silence has told quite a story, Mr. Rhodes." A slight movement caught her attention, a twitch of his fingers barely perceptible. Brenda leaned forward, her trained eyes scanning for any other signs of consciousness. There, another movement, this time more definite. "Mr. Rhodes," she called, pressing the alert button. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, struggling against the weight of months of sleep. Brenda dimmed the lights quickly, knowing the sensitivity he would experience. "Take your time," she encouraged, her voice steady and calm. "You're safe. You're in the hospital." When his eyes finally opened, they were a clouded blue-gray, confused and unfocused. Brenda positioned herself where he could see her clearly. "I'm Nurse Carter. You've been in a coma for 3 months following an accident. Try not to speak yet. Just blink once, if you understand me." A slow, deliberate blink. "Good," she smiled warmly. "That's very good. I'm going to ask you some simple questions. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Are you in any pain?" 2 blinks. "Are you thirsty?" 1 blink. As she helped him with small sips of water, Brenda noticed how his eyes, though still clouded with confusion, followed her movements with increasing awareness. She'd seen many patients wake from comas, but something about his gaze, the vulnerability, the raw humanity replacing the polished exterior she'd seen in news photos, struck a chord within her. The next hours were a whirlwind of medical checks, neurological tests and careful monitoring. Cassian drifted in and out of consciousness, each awakening longer than the last. Brenda stayed nearby, providing a constant presence as different doctors came and went, as tests were performed, as his new reality slowly took shape around him. It wasn't until evening that he managed his first words, raspy and weak. "What happened?" Brenda moved closer to his bedside. "You were in a car accident," she explained gently. "Your vehicle was hit by a drunk driver on Highway 99. You've been here at Seattle General ever since." His face contorted with effort as memories began to surface. "Andrea," Brenda hesitated, knowing he was asking about his fiancée. "Would you like me to contact her for you?" A shadow passed over his face. Perhaps some part of him already knew. He closed his eyes, swallowing hard. When he opened them again, they were clearer, more focused and filled with a pain that had nothing to do with physical injuries. "No," he whispered. Brenda nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. She'd seen Andrea's last visit 2 months ago, watched her remove the engagement ring and place it on the bedside table with a note. The ring and note were now safely stored with his other personal effects. "Right now," Brenda said firmly but kindly, "your only job is to focus on healing. Everything else can wait." She adjusted his pillows with practiced ease. "Small steps, Mr. Rhodes, that's how we'll do this." He studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for something. Whatever he found there seemed to reassure him, because some of the tension left his shoulders. "Cassian," he managed. "Please call me Cassian." "All right, Cassian," she smiled, checking his IV one last time. "I'm Brenda, and I'll be here to help you with those small steps." As night settled over Seattle, Brenda watched him drift off to sleep, a natural sleep this time, not the heavy stillness of a coma. Outside the window, city lights twinkled against the dark sky, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Just another night in the city. But for the man in room 412, it was the beginning of a new chapter. Brenda touched the old ring that hung from a chain around her neck, her grandmother's wedding band, a reminder of resilience and love that had survived hard times. Something about Cassian's awakening, about the raw honesty in his eyes when he'd asked about Andrea, about the quiet dignity with which he'd accepted the unspoken truth, resonated deeply within her. As she finished her notes in his chart, Brenda found herself hoping that this patient, unlike so many others, would find more than just physical healing within these hospital walls. Sometimes, she'd learned, the deepest wounds were the ones that left no visible scars. The night shift nurse arrived to take over, and Brenda gathered her things to leave. At the door she paused, looking back at her sleeping patient. In the dim light, with his defenses stripped away by circumstance, he looked different from the powerful executive in the news photos. He looked simply human. "Good night, Cassian," she whispered, and quietly closed the door behind her. Dawn crept through the hospital windows, painting shadows across Cassian's room. He'd been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of his life. The doctors had warned him about memory gaps, a common occurrence after severe trauma, but what troubled him most weren't the memories he'd lost, but the ones that remained crystal clear. The door opened quietly, and Brenda entered, carrying her morning charts. She noticed immediately that he was awake. "You're up early," she observed, checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. "Never was much good at sleeping in," Cassian replied, his voice stronger than the day before but still rough around the edges. He attempted to push himself up, grimacing at the effort. "Here." Brenda moved to adjust his bed, her movements precise and professional. "Today's going to be busy. Physical therapy starts this morning, and Dr. Anderson wants to run a few cognitive tests." Cassian nodded, then caught sight of his reflection in the window. Gaunt, pale, with a beard he'd never worn before. His hand instinctively went to his face, fingers tracing the unfamiliar growth. "We can help you with that," Brenda offered, noting his discomfort. "Would you like to clean up a bit before therapy?" "Please," he said, the single word carrying the weight of his pride. Brenda gathered the necessary supplies, a basin of warm water, shaving cream, a safety razor. She'd done this countless times for other patients, but something about Cassian's quiet dignity made this moment feel different. "I can manage," he insisted, reaching for the razor. "I'm sure you can," Brenda replied calmly, "but let's not rush things. Your motor skills need time to recover." She met his frustrated gaze with steady understanding. Sometimes accepting help is harder than offering it. The truth in her words seemed to reach him. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he gave a small nod. As Brenda worked, her movements gentle but sure, Cassian gradually settled into the vulnerable intimacy of being cared for. "Tell me about the accident," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Brenda's hands remained steady, though her heart clenched at the request. "It happened on a Tuesday night," she began, carefully wiping shaving cream from his jaw. "A drunk driver ran a red light on Highway 99. Your car was hit on the driver's side. The emergency team had to cut you out of the vehicle. And the other driver, minor injuries. He was arrested at the scene." Brenda paused, studying his expression. "He's serving time now." Cassian absorbed this information in silence. When he spoke again, his voice was distant. "I was supposed to be at a dinner meeting that night. Big merger deal." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Funny how none of that seems important now." "Perspective has a way of shifting when we least expect it," Brenda replied, finishing the last stroke of the razor. She handed him a warm towel and a small mirror. Looking at his cleaned-up reflection, Cassian seemed to recognize himself a bit more. "Thank you," he said softly, and Brenda understood he meant for more than just the shave. The physical therapist, Devin, arrived shortly after. He was a broad-shouldered man with an easy smile and patient demeanor. "Ready to get back on your feet, Mr. Rhodes." What followed was an hour of grueling basic exercises. Cassian, who had once prided himself on his physical fitness, found himself struggling with the simplest movements. Frustration radiated from him in waves, but he pressed on, jaw set with determination. Brenda stayed nearby, monitoring his vitals and offering quiet encouragement. She noticed how he twisted the ring on his finger, his father's ring she'd learned from his medical records, whenever the exercises became particularly challenging. "Remember," she said during a water break, "your body hasn't moved for 3 months. This is a marathon, not a sprint." "I used to run marathons," Cassian replied, breathless from the effort of simple leg lifts. "Actually ran Boston twice." "Then you understand pacing," Brenda smiled, handing him a fresh cup of water. "And you know that every finish line starts with a single step." As the morning progressed, more of Cassian's new reality began to sink in. Dr. Anderson arrived with test results and a lengthy recovery plan. Cognitive function seemed intact, but physical rehabilitation would take months. There would be daily therapy sessions, medications, and a complete lifestyle change. "What about work?" Cassian asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "Doctor." Anderson's expression was sympathetic but firm. "For now, focus on recovery. We'll discuss return-to-work timelines once you're stronger." After the doctor left, Cassian sat in silence, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline, the very skyline his office had once overlooked. Brenda watched as he unconsciously touched his ring again, turning it slowly. "Your father's?" she asked gently, nodding toward the ring. Cassian looked surprised, then understanding crossed his face. "Yes. He was a contractor, Built houses his whole life, worked with his hands. He flexed his own fingers, still weak from disuse. He used to say the truest measure of a man isn't what he owns, but what he builds. Wise words, Brenda replied, checking his afternoon medications. What did he think about your career choice? He died before I made partner, Cassian said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if he would have recognized the man I became. He paused, then added with a hint of self-deprecation, corner office, $1,000 suits, 80-hour weeks. And now? Now? Cassian attempted to lift his water cup, hands shaking slightly. Now I can barely hold a glass without help. Brenda stepped forward, steadying the cup without taking it from him. But you're trying. That's what matters. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A moment of understanding that went beyond patient and caregiver. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young nurse entered with lunch, breaking the spell. Brenda stepped back, resuming her professional demeanor. Try to eat everything, she instructed, moving toward the door. You'll need the strength for this afternoon's therapy session. Brenda, Cassian called as she reached the doorway. When she turned, he offered a small but genuine smile. Thank you. For earlier. For understanding. She nodded, returning his smile with one of her own. Small steps, Cassian, we'll get there. As she walked down the hospital corridor, Brenda touched her grandmother's ring hanging from its chain. She thought about strength, not the kind that lifted weights or closed business deals, but the kind that kept going when everything fell apart, the kind that accepted help when pride demanded otherwise. She'd seen that kind of strength in Cassian today, beneath the frustration and loss. It reminded her of her grandmother's favorite saying, "Baby, sometimes God breaks us down to our foundation so we can build something stronger." Looking at her schedule for the rest of the day, Brenda pushed away the unexpected warmth she'd felt during their conversation. She was a professional after all, and he was her patient, nothing more. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that sometimes the strongest foundations were built in the moments when we were most broken. 1 week into his recovery, Cassian faced his first major challenge, a visit from Lawrence Preston, the CFO of his company. Brenda was checking his morning vitals when Preston arrived, his expensive suit and polished demeanor a stark reminder of Cassian's former life. "Rhodes?" Preston nodded, hovering awkwardly at the doorway. "Good to see you, conscious." Brenda noticed Cassian's vital signs spike slightly on the monitor. "Remember your breathing exercises," she murmured quietly, adjusting his pillows before stepping back. "Lawrence," Cassian acknowledged, his voice steady despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "Come to check if I'm ready to sign papers." Preston shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, yes. The board, well, given the circumstances and your condition." He pulled out an envelope from his briefcase. "They're offering a generous severance package." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Brenda busied herself with checking medications, giving them privacy while remaining within earshot, a skill she'd perfected over years of nursing. 3 months, Cassian said finally, his voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "I was in a coma for 3 months, and they're already replacing me." "You have to understand the position we're in," Preston replied, placing the envelope on the bedside table. The Morrison merger that I orchestrated?" Cassian interrupted, his hand unconsciously moving to twist his father's ring. "The one I spent 18 months putting together." Preston straightened his tie. "Business doesn't stop for anyone, Rhodes. You know that better than most." He glanced at his watch. "The papers need to be signed by Friday. Legal will handle everything. You just need to sign." Cassian stared at the envelope for a long moment. 7 years, he said quietly. "I gave that company 7 years of my life. Missed my father's funeral for a board meeting. Postponed my wedding twice for deals." He looked up at Preston. "Tell me, Lawrence, did anyone from the board even visit while I was unconscious?" The answering silence was deafening. "That's what I thought." Cassian closed his eyes briefly. "Leave the papers. I'll have my lawyer review them." After Preston left, Cassian remained silent, staring out the window. Brenda approached quietly, checking his blood pressure, which had elevated during the conversation. "You knew," he said suddenly, not looking at her. "You knew they hadn't visited." "Yes," she admitted, "but it wasn't my place to tell you." He turned to face her, and the raw honesty in his expression caught her off guard. "Did anyone visit regularly, besides Andrea? I mean, before she—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Brenda considered her answer carefully. "There was a janitor," she said finally. "Ramon. He came by most nights after his shift. Said he remembered how you always treated him with respect, asked about his family." She smiled softly. He brought fresh flowers every week. Cassian's eyes widened in recognition. Ramon Alvarez. His daughter was starting college. Pre-med at University of Washington. Brenda nodded. He said you wrote her a recommendation letter. A genuine smile crossed Cassian's face, the first Brenda had seen since his awakening. I remember that. Bright girl. Reminded me of my sister at that age. The smile faded. I should have done more things like that. It's never too late to live differently, Brenda said, checking his IV line. She noticed his breakfast tray was untouched. You need to eat, even if you're not hungry. Want to tell me about your sister while you try? Cassian picked up his spoon, the movement still slightly shaky but improving. Lily, he said, taking a small bite of oatmeal. She lives in Portland now. Teaches 3rd grade. He paused. I haven't been a very good brother lately. Lately is not forever, Brenda replied, pulling up a chair. It was technically time for her rounds, but something told her Cassian needed company more than her other patients needed an early check-in. As Cassian ate, he shared stories about Lily, how she'd practically raised him after their mother died, how she'd supported his career even while gently questioning his priorities. Brenda noticed how his voice softened when speaking about family, how different he seemed from the corporate executive Preston had come to see. What about you? He asked suddenly. Any siblings? Brenda touched her grandmother's ring reflexively. No, it was just me and my grandmother growing up. In Atlanta. She rarely shared personal details with patients, but something about Cassian's genuine interest made her continue. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident. I was 8. Understanding flickered in Cassian's eyes. Is that why you became a nurse? Partly, she admitted. I spent a lot of time in hospitals as a kid, not as a patient, but visiting my parents before they passed. There was this one nurse, Miss Beatrice. She used to bring me apple juice and graham crackers, let me help her organize supplies. Brenda smiled at the memory. She showed me that sometimes the greatest kindness is just being present with someone during their darkest moments. Like you're doing now? Cassian asked softly. Their eyes met, and Brenda felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the one she'd been steadfastly ignoring. This is my job, she said, standing up perhaps a bit too quickly. And speaking of which, I need to do my rounds. Brenda, Cassian called as she reached the door. Thank you for staying, for sharing. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried into the hallway. At the nurse's station, she paused, taking a deep breath. This was dangerous territory. She'd seen it happen before. Patients developing feelings for their caregivers, nurses getting too emotionally involved. It was natural, given the intimate nature of recovery, but it wasn't real. Besides, she had sworn off relationships after Michael. The scars from that relationship, though invisible, still ached sometimes. She absently rubbed her wrist, remembering the bruises she'd hidden beneath long sleeves, the excuses she'd made to her grandmother. Nurse Carter? An aide interrupted her thoughts. They need you in room 305. Grateful for the distraction, Brenda immersed herself in work. But throughout the day, her thoughts kept drifting back to Cassian, to the vulnerability in his eyes when Preston left, to the warmth in his voice when he spoke about his sister, to the way he seemed to see beyond her professional facade. That evening, as she finished her shift, she passed by his room one last time. He was asleep, the severance package still unopened on his table. In sleep, the lines of worry smoothed from his face, and she could see traces of the man he must have been before success hardened him. Good night, Cassian, she whispered, her fingers brushing her grandmother's ring. As she walked to her car, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Baby, sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head is ready to admit it. But Brenda shook off the thought. She was a professional, and Cassian Rhodes was her patient. Nothing more could come of it. Yet as she drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, she couldn't quite convince her heart of what her head so firmly believed. 2 weeks into his recovery, Cassian's physical progress was remarkable. His determination in therapy had impressed even the most seasoned staff members, but it was the emotional walls that proved harder to break down. The morning started like any other, until Brenda arrived for her shift and found Cassian's room empty, his bed untouched. Her heart rate quickened as she checked the bathroom, also empty. She was about to call security when a young nurse rushed in. He's in the garden, the nurse said, slightly out of breath. Insisted on going down there at dawn. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Brenda found him in the hospital's small courtyard garden, seated on a bench beneath a maple tree. He wore the navy sweatpants and grey t-shirt his sister Lily had brought during her brief visit, a stark contrast to his former designer suits. His feet were bare against the dewy grass. "You're worrying my staff," Brenda said, approaching quietly. "I needed air," he replied, not looking at her. Real air, not the recycled kind. She noticed the slightly crumpled papers in his hand, the severance package from Preston. "You opened it. $5 million, he said flatly. "That's what they think my life is worth. 15 years of 60-hour weeks, missed holidays, postponed dreams, all wrapped up in a neat little package with a corporate bow." Brenda sat beside him, maintaining professional distance while still offering presence. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." He ran a hand through his hair, longer now than she suspected he'd ever worn it. "All my life, I've known exactly what to do. Every step planned, every move calculated." He laughed bitterly. "I even had a 10-year timeline for having kids, can you believe that? And now, he finally turned to look at her. "Now I can't even walk to this bench without getting winded. Now my fiancé's engaged to someone else. Yes, I saw the announcement in the business section. Now everything I thought I knew about my life feels like a lie." A cool morning breeze rustled the maple leaves above them. Somewhere nearby, a bird called out to its mate. "Want to hear something funny?" Brenda found herself saying. "When I was younger, I had my whole life planned too. Marriage at 25, 2 kids by 30, house with a white picket fence. The whole American dream." She touched her grandmother's ring unconsciously. "Then I met Michael." She hadn't meant to say his name, hadn't spoken it aloud in years, but something about this moment, about Cassian's raw honesty, broke down her careful walls. "What happened?" Cassian asked softly. "He was charming at first. Successful lawyer, active in the community. My grandmother adored him." Brenda's fingers traced the chain around her neck. "The control started small, suggestions about my clothes, comments about my friends. Then came the criticism, the isolation, the—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "One night he pushed me down the stairs, said I'd tripped. That's when my grandmother gave me this ring and told me real love doesn't leave bruises." Cassian's hand moved as if to reach for hers, then stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, and the simple words carried genuine understanding. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," Brenda said firmly. "I'm telling you because sometimes the life we plan isn't the life we're meant to live. Sometimes the universe has other ideas." "Like drunk drivers on Highway 99? "Like drunk drivers on Highway 99, she agreed. "The question isn't why it happened. The question is what you're going to do now." Cassian looked down at the severance papers. "I could retire, travel, do all the things I said I'd do someday." He crumpled the papers slightly. "But that feels like letting them win. Maybe winning isn't the point anymore," Brenda suggested gently. Before he could respond, his body tensed and a grimace crossed his face. Muscle spasms, a common occurrence during recovery. Without thinking, Brenda moved closer, her trained hands finding the knotted muscles in his shoulder. "Breathe through it," she instructed professionally, though she was acutely aware of his warmth beneath her fingers. "Like we practiced." Cassian followed her guidance, his breathing slowly steadying, but neither of them moved away when the spasm passed. For a moment, they sat in charged silence, her hand still resting lightly on his shoulder. "Why did you tell me about Michael?" he asked quietly. Brenda withdrew her hand, standing up quickly. "We should get you back inside. You have physical therapy in an hour." "Brenda," his voice stopped her. "Please." She turned back, meeting his gaze. The morning sun caught the silver in his temples, and his blue-gray eyes held something that made her heart race. "Because," she said finally, "you needed to know you're not the only one who's had to rebuild from scratch. And because you trust me." There was a hint of hope in his question. "You're my patient, Mr. Rhodes," she replied, deliberately using his formal name. Trust is part of the healing process, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Somewhere between the late-night vital checks and early morning conversations, between his quiet strength and unexpected kindness, Cassian had become more than just another patient, and that terrified her. "We need to go inside," she said firmly. "Can you make it back, or should I get a wheelchair?" "I can walk," he replied, though his voice was tired. As he stood, his legs wobbled slightly, and Brenda instinctively stepped closer to steady him. Their bodies brushed, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Brenda could feel his heart racing beneath her palm, could smell the fresh morning air on his skin. Warning bells rang in her head, but her body refused to move. "Nurse Carter," a voice called from the doorway, breaking the spell. "Dr. Anderson is looking for you." Brenda stepped back quickly, professional mask sliding back into place. "Coming!" She turned to Cassian. "Use the handrail on your way back, and please don't leave your room without telling someone next time." He nodded, but his eyes held questions she wasn't ready to answer. As she hurried back inside, Brenda's grandmother's ring felt heavy against her chest, a reminder of past wounds and the risk of new ones. But for the first time in years, she wondered if some risks might be worth taking. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Cassian's hospital room as he struggled through another physical therapy session. 3 weeks into his recovery, the exercises had grown more challenging, pushing his limits further each day. 5 more steps, Devon encouraged, supporting Cassian as he gripped the parallel bars. Sweat darkened his grey t-shirt, his knuckles white from effort. Brenda watched from the doorway, clipboard in hand, trying to maintain professional distance. But she couldn't help noticing how different he looked now. Leaner, stronger, more determined. The corporate polish had been stripped away, revealing something far more genuine underneath. Suddenly Cassian's legs buckled. Before either Devon or Brenda could react, he caught himself, muscles trembling with effort. But instead of stopping, he pushed forward, completing the final steps. "Enough for today," Devon said, helping Cassian into the wheelchair. "You're making incredible progress, but we need to pace." "Schedule another session for this evening," Cassian interrupted, still breathing heavily. "That's not advisable." Brenda stepped in, her nursing instincts overriding her attempt at distance. "Your body needs rest to recover." Cassian's jaw tightened. "I need to get stronger, What you need is to stop pushing yourself to the breaking point," Brenda said firmly. "Devon, I'll handle this." After the therapist left, Brenda began checking Cassian's vitals. His pulse was racing, blood pressure elevated. "This isn't a race," she said softly. "Isn't it?" He grabbed her wrist suddenly, stopping her movements. His touch was gentle but urgent. "Every day I spend in this room is another day the world moves on without me. Another day of being helpless, dependent." "Let go of my wrist," Brenda said quietly. Something in her tone made him release her immediately. "I'm sorry," he said, recognition flickering in his eyes. "I didn't think your past." Brenda stepped back, her heart pounding. Not from fear, Cassian's grip hadn't been threatening, but from the jolt of electricity that had shot through her at his touch. "It's fine," she said professionally. "But we need to talk about these self-destructive patterns." "Self-destructive?" A harsh laugh escaped him. "I'm trying to get better." "No, you're trying to punish yourself," Brenda countered. "I've seen it before. Patients pushing too hard, too fast because they think they deserve the pain." "You don't understand." "Don't I?" Her voice rose slightly. "You think you're the first person to have their life shattered, to feel helpless, weak." She touched her grandmother's ring unconsciously. "Sometimes breaking down is part of breaking free." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Cassian stared at her, seeing past her professional facade to the woman who understood loss all too well. "Your sister called," Brenda said finally, changing the subject. "She's coming tomorrow. And Ramon stopped by while you were in therapy. Left those books you asked for." Cassian nodded, but his eyes never left her face. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Pull away. Every time we get close to something real, you retreat behind your nurse's clipboard." "Because this isn't real," Brenda said firmly. "What you're feeling, what you think you're feeling, it's a common response during recovery. Patients often develop emotional attachments to their caregivers." "Is that what you think this is?" Cassian's voice was quiet but intense. "Transference, a psychological crutch?" "It doesn't matter what it is," Brenda replied. "I'm your nurse. That's all I can be." "Look me in the eyes," he challenged. "Tell me you don't feel this too." Brenda met his gaze, ready to deny everything, but the words caught in her throat. In his blue-grey eyes she saw not the desperate gratitude of a patient, but something deeper, recognition, understanding, a connection that transcended their current roles. A knock at the door saved her from responding. Dr. Anderson entered carrying test results. "Good news, Mr. Rhodes. At this rate of progress, we can start discussing discharge plans soon." The word discharge hit Brenda like a physical blow. She busied herself with straightening medical supplies, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. "How soon?" Cassian asked, and Brenda couldn't read his tone. "Perhaps 2 weeks, assuming you continue to improve. You'll need outpatient therapy, of course, and home health care initially." Dr. Anderson continued outlining the plan, but Brenda barely heard her. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, Cassian would leave, and their daily interactions would end. She should have felt relieved. The growing tension between them would disappear. She could return to her carefully ordered life. Instead, she felt as though she was losing something she hadn't meant to find. "Nurse Carter," Dr. Anderson's voice broke through her thoughts. Could you update Mr. Rhodes's charts with the new medication schedule? Of course, Brenda replied automatically. She gathered her things, not looking at Cassian. I'll return later for your evening check. But as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Brenda? She turned, professional mask firmly in place. Yes, Mr. Rhodes. Thank you for what you said earlier about breaking free. Their eyes met one final time, and in that moment, all their carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble. Brenda nodded quickly and left, her grandmother's ring pressing against her chest like a reminder of all the reasons she couldn't let herself feel what she was feeling. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. Sometimes the hardest walls to break down are the ones we build ourselves. But some walls, Brenda reminded herself, existed for a reason. Some boundaries needed to stay intact. Even if keeping them intact meant breaking her own heart in the process. The hospital cafeteria buzzed with its usual morning activity as Brenda stared into her untouched coffee. She'd switched shifts with another nurse to avoid being present for Lily's visit to Cassian, telling herself it was the professional thing to do. In reality, she needed space to think. Earth to Brenda. Monica, her fellow nurse, waved a hand in front of her face. You've been stirring that coffee for 5 minutes straight. Sorry. Brenda smiled weakly. Just tired. Monica gave her a knowing look. Nothing to do with tall, handsome, and recovering in room 412. Brenda's hand automatically went to her grandmother's ring. He's a patient, Monica, that's all. Right. That's why you switched shifts for the first time in 2 years. Monica's expression softened. Look, I've known you since nursing school. I was there after Michael. I've never seen you like this. Before Brenda could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Anderson. Need you in my office. Important. Saved by the bell, Monica said. But this conversation isn't over. Brenda found Dr. Anderson reviewing files in her office. The doctor looked up, her expression unreadable. Close the door, please. Brenda's heart raced. Had someone reported her unprofessional behavior? Had Cassian complained? I've received an interesting offer, Dr. E. Anderson began. From the National Medical Education Initiative. They're launching a pilot program in Atlanta, focusing on community healthcare education. They need a program coordinator with both nursing experience and teaching capabilities. Brenda's breath caught. Atlanta. Home. I recommended you, Dr. Anderson continued. They were particularly impressed by your work with the resident training program here. It's a 2-year contract, significant salary increase, opportunity for advancement. She slid a folder across her desk. They need an answer by next Friday. Brenda opened the folder with trembling hands. The opportunity was incredible. Exactly what she'd dreamed of doing. Teaching, making a difference on a larger scale, being closer to her grandmother. What about my patients here? She asked quietly. We'd arrange transitions over the next month. Dr. Anderson's voice softened. Including Mr. Rhodes. He's being discharged in 2 weeks anyway. Brenda closed the folder, her mind spinning. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course. But Brenda, Dr. Anderson's eyes were kind but firm. Make this decision for the right reasons. Either way, walking back through the hospital corridors, Brenda felt as though she was moving through a dream. The Atlanta position was perfect, a chance to start fresh, to make a real difference, to run away. She was so lost in thought that she almost collided with someone turning the corner. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into Cassian's surprised face. He was walking with a cane now, Lily supporting his other side. Sorry, Brenda stepped back quickly. I wasn't watching where... Brenda, Lily smiled warmly. I'm so glad to finally meet you properly. Cassian's told me so much about you. Brenda forced a professional smile, avoiding Cassian's intense gaze. All good things, I hope. How was your session with Dr. Anderson? Encouraging, Lily answered, though my stubborn brother here keeps pushing too hard. Some things are worth pushing for, Cassian said quietly, his eyes never leaving Brenda's face. The tension crackled between them, until Lily cleared her throat. I should get some coffee. Cassian, you okay to get back to your room? I'll make sure he gets there safely, Brenda offered, automatically stepping into her nursing role. They walked in silence, Cassian's cane tapping softly against the floor. His progress was remarkable, his stride almost normal, though still careful. You switched shifts, he said finally. I had some things to take care of. Like avoiding me? Brenda stopped, turning to face him. Not everything is about you, Mr. Rhodes. Back to Mr. Rhodes, are we? His voice was tired. After everything? There is no everything, Brenda insisted. There can't be. Because of Michael. The name hit her like a slap. Don't. Then because of what? Hospital policy? Professional ethics? Cassian stepped closer, his free hand reaching for hers. Or because you're scared? Brenda backed away. You don't know me, don't I? His voice softened. I know you touch that ring when you're nervous. I know you deflect personal questions with professional answers. I know you're strongest when you're taking care of others, but you never let anyone take care of you. Stop. I know you love gardenias, you always smell like them. I know you hum old jazz songs when you think no one's listening. I know you're brilliant and caring and terrified of letting anyone close enough to hurt you again. Tears threatened to spill from Brenda's eyes. I got a job offer, she blurted out. In Atlanta, teaching position. They need an answer by next Friday. Cassian's face went still. When would you leave? A month. Brenda's voice cracked slightly. It's a great opportunity. Is that why they offered it or why you're considering it? Before she could answer, an orderly rushed up. Nurse Carter, emergency in 308. I have to go, Brenda said, grateful for the interruption. Brenda. Cassian's voice stopped her. We're not finished. Yes, we are, she replied, not looking back. We have to be. She spent the rest of her shift in a blur of activity, deliberately keeping herself too busy to think. But as she drove home that evening, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Running away from love is still running away, baby. The Atlanta position would be perfect. A clean break, a fresh start. No complicated feelings, no ethical dilemmas, no risk of having her heart broken again. So why did it feel like she was making the biggest mistake of her life? At a red light, Brenda touched her grandmother's ring, remembering the day she'd received it. Love ain't always safe, her grandmother had said, but the safest love ain't always the truest. The light turned green, but Brenda sat there, tears finally falling freely. Sometimes the hardest decisions weren't between right and wrong, but between safe and true. Seattle's infamous rain pounded against the hospital windows as thunder rolled across the sky. The storm had knocked out power in several parts of the city, and though the hospital's backup generators hummed steadily, an air of tension permeated the corridors. Brenda hadn't meant to work this shift. She'd been deliberately avoiding evening duties since her conversation with Cassian 3 days ago. But when Monica called in sick, she couldn't refuse to cover. Not without raising questions she wasn't ready to answer. Multiple traumas coming in from a highway pileup, Dr. Anderson announced at the nurses' station. All hands on deck. Nurse Carter, I need you to check on your regular patients first, then report to the ER. Brenda's heart thumped as she approached room 412. Perhaps Cassian would be sleeping, but as she opened the door, she found him by the window watching the storm. His discharge was scheduled for the next day, and his few belongings were already packed in a duffel bag Lily had brought. Your last set of vitals for the night, Brenda said professionally, keeping her distance. Have you made your decision? Cassian asked without turning around. About Atlanta. I haven't given them my answer yet. She moved to check the monitors, maintaining her clinical demeanor. But it's an incredible opportunity. To run away. To make a difference, she corrected, though her voice wavered slightly. Lightning flashed, illuminating his profile. He'd changed in these weeks. Not just physically, but something deeper. The corporate mask had been completely stripped away, revealing a man both stronger and more vulnerable than she'd initially thought. I signed the severance papers, he said suddenly, but I'm not taking their job offer in the London office. This made Brenda pause. They offered you a position? Junior partner, international division. He turned to face her. A fresh start, they called it. Away from Seattle. Away from everything. That would be good for your career, Brenda managed, though the thought of him in London made her chest tight. My career, he laughed softly. You know what I realized during all those therapy sessions? I've spent my entire life climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. Before Brenda could respond, the lights flickered ominously. A crash of thunder shook the building, and suddenly the room plunged into darkness. The backup generator had failed. Stay calm, Brenda said automatically, reaching for the emergency flashlight she kept in her pocket. The auxiliary power should... Her words cut off as she felt Cassian's hand close over hers in the darkness, warm and sure. She knew she should pull away, maintain professional distance. Instead, she found herself frozen, heart racing. I'm not going to London, he said softly, his voice closer than she'd expected. And you don't want to go to Atlanta. You don't know what I want, she whispered. But there was no conviction in her words, don't I? His other hand found her face in the darkness, fingers gentle against her cheek. You're trembling. "This is inappropriate," she managed, but she didn't move away. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you feel nothing," he challenged. "Tell me I'm just another patient." Lightning flashed again, illuminating them for a brief moment. Brenda saw everything she'd been trying to deny in his expression, longing, understanding, and something deeper that terrified her. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't what?" "Can't look you in the eyes and lie." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "But I can't do this either. I'm your nurse." "For 8 more hours," he reminded her. "Then what's your excuse?" Before she could answer, her pager buzzed urgently. "Emergency room," she read in the dim light. "I have to go." "Brenda." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "We need to finish this conversation." "There's nothing to finish," she insisted, finally pulling away. "You're being discharged tomorrow. You'll go back to your life, I'll go to Atlanta, and we'll both pretend these weeks never happened. Is that what you really want?" Another flash of lightning illuminated the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "What I want doesn't matter. I learned that lesson with Michael." "I'm not Michael." "No," she agreed softly. "You're more dangerous, because you make me want to believe in second chances." Her pager buzzed again, more insistently this time. "Go," Cassian said, his voice rough with emotion. "But this isn't over." Brenda hurried through the darkened corridors, her mind racing faster than her feet. In the emergency room, chaos reigned. The storm had caused a multi-car pileup on the highway, and injured people were being brought in despite the power outage. "Nurse Carter!" Dr. Anderson called. "I need you here." For the next several hours, Brenda lost herself in the work she knew best, helping others, fixing what was broken, staying strong when everything around her threatened to fall apart. But even as she moved from patient to patient, her grandmother's ring felt heavy against her chest, like a reminder of unfinished business. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to ease. Power returned gradually to different parts of the hospital, and the emergency room chaos slowly subsided. Brenda found herself in the staff locker room, exhausted and emotionally raw. "Rough night?" Monica asked, appearing beside her. "You have no idea," Brenda replied, touching her grandmother's ring absently. "Actually, I do." Monica's voice was gentle. "I saw what happened in room 412 when the lights went out. The door was open." Brenda closed her eyes. "Nothing happened." "But something could have." Monica put a hand on her shoulder. "Brenda, I know you're scared. After Michael, anyone would be. But I also know you haven't smiled, really smiled, in years. Not until these past few weeks." "It doesn't matter," Brenda insisted. "He's leaving today and I have the Atlanta position. Do you remember what your grandmother told us that day we visited her? About how she met your grandfather?" Brenda nodded, tears threatening again. "She said sometimes love comes disguised as a detour. Maybe this is your detour," Monica suggested softly. "Maybe it's time to stop running and see where it leads." Before Brenda could respond, an aide appeared at the door. "Nurse Carter, Mr. Rhodes is asking for you. Says it's important." Brenda's heart leaped even as her mind screamed warnings. She looked at Monica, who simply smiled. "Some storms," her friend said wisely. "Clear the air." Morning light streamed through freshly washed windows, the storm's aftermath leaving everything looking somehow cleaner, clearer. Brenda stood outside room 412, her hand hovering over the door handle, heart pounding. She'd avoided this moment through hours of emergency room chaos, but she couldn't avoid it any longer. When she finally entered, Cassian was dressed in casual clothes Lily had brought, dark jeans and a soft grey sweater that made his eyes look more blue than grey. He was signing discharge papers, his movements sure and steady. No trace remained of the broken man who'd awakened in this room weeks ago. "Your ride is here," Brenda said professionally, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "Lily's waiting downstairs." Cassian looked up, his pen pausing mid-signature. "I asked for you earlier." Emergency room was chaos after the storm. She moved to check his vitals one final time, maintaining protocol, even though they both knew it was unnecessary. Multiple casualties, power outages. "Brenda." His hand caught hers as she reached for the blood pressure cuff. "Look at me." She did, against her better judgment. In the morning light, she could see every detail of his face, the slight silver at his temples, the new laugh lines around his eyes, the intensity of his gaze that made her breath catch. "I'm not taking the London position," he said quietly, "and I'm not going back to corporate law." This wasn't what she'd expected. "What are you going to do? Remember Ramon's daughter, the pre-med student?" When Brenda nodded, he continued, She introduced me to a program that provides legal aid to patients dealing with medical debt and insurance battles. They need someone who understands both the corporate and human sides of healthcare. That's wonderful, Brenda managed, genuinely moved by how perfectly this path suited his transformation. I start next month, he said, still holding her hand. Here in Seattle. The implication hung in the air between them. Seattle, not London. A choice that left possibilities open. Cassian, she began, but he cut her off. Before you say anything, I need you to know something. He released her hand, but held her gaze. These past weeks lying in this bed, I've had a lot of time to think about who I was, who I've become, what really matters. He stood, moving closer, and Brenda found herself rooted to the spot. I thought I had everything figured out before the accident, he continued. Success, status, a perfectly planned future. But I was just collecting trophies to fill an empty life. His voice softened. And then I woke up to find someone who saw past all that, who saw me at my weakest and didn't look away. I'm a nurse, Brenda whispered. It's my job to help patients heal. Is that all this is? A nurse helping her patient? It has to be. Why? Because. Her voice cracked slightly. Because anything else is complicated and messy and dangerous. Because I've spent years building walls to protect myself. Because you're scared, he finished gently. So am I. This admission, this vulnerability from a man who'd once ruled boardrooms, struck her deeply. The Atlanta position, she began, is perfect for you, he acknowledged. You'd be amazing at it. But is it what you want? Or is it just another wall? Before she could answer, Monica appeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Anderson needs the discharge papers right away. New admission coming in. Brenda stepped back, professional mask sliding back into place. Of course. Mr. Rhodes, do you need help with your belongings? The formality seemed to hit Cassian like a physical blow. No, he said quietly. I can manage. As he gathered his things, Brenda noticed something on the bedside table, a small journal she'd seen him writing in during late nights. He was leaving it behind. Your journal, she called after him. It's for you, he said, pausing at the door. Read it when you're ready to stop running. Then he was gone, leaving Brenda alone in the room that had housed so many unspoken words. Her hands trembled as she picked up the journal, but she didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she began her end-of-shift routine, checking supplies, updating charts, maintaining the order that had always given her comfort, but every movement felt mechanical, empty. You okay? Monica asked, returning to help clean the room. Fine, Brenda replied automatically, then stopped. No, I'm not fine. I'm terrified. Of what? Of making the wrong choice. Of getting hurt again. She touched her grandmother's ring. Of wanting something I shouldn't want. Monica watched her for a moment, then said, You know what I think. I think sometimes the things we shouldn't want are exactly the things we need most. It's not that simple. No, Monica agreed. But maybe it's not as complicated as you're making it. She picked up the journal Cassian had left, holding it out. Maybe the answer is right here, waiting for you to be brave enough to read it. Brenda stared at the journal, remembering all the nights she'd seen Cassian writing in it, his face thoughtful in the dim light. What truths lay within those pages? What words had he needed to write rather than speak? The Atlanta program called, she said suddenly. They need my answer by tomorrow morning. And I don't know what to tell them. Monica squeezed her shoulder gently. Yes, you do. You're just not ready to admit it yet. As they finished cleaning the room, Brenda's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Anderson. Whatever you decide, make sure you're running towards something, not away from it. Brenda sat heavily in the chair where she'd spent so many hours watching over Cassian. The journal lay in her lap, its pages holding words that could change everything, or confirm that she was right to maintain her walls. Outside, Seattle was coming back to life after the storm. Somewhere in the city, Cassian was starting his new life, one that deliberately kept him close to her orbit. The choice he'd made spoke volumes, but was she brave enough to hear what it was saying? Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes, baby, the biggest risk isn't in loving someone. It's in letting the chance to love pass you by. With trembling fingers, Brenda opened the journal to its first page. The hospital's night shift was beginning as Brenda sat in the empty break room, Cassian's journal open in her lap. She'd waited hours to read it, finishing her shift in a daze of routine tasks and automated responses. Now, in the quiet of evening, his words finally lay exposed before her. Day 1 after waking. The world feels strange, like I'm watching it through foggy glass. Everything I thought I knew seems distant, unreal. But there's one clear thing. The nurse with kind eyes who doesn't treat me like I'm broken. She sees something in me I thought I'd lost. I don't even know her full name yet. Brenda's fingers traced the slightly shaky handwriting of those early entries. She remembered those first days, his struggle to hold a pen, his determination to write despite the difficulty. Day 7. Brenda Elise Carter. I heard another nurse use her full name today. It suits her. Elegant but strong like her. She thinks I don't notice how she touches that ring when she's worried, or how she hums jazz when she's changing IV bags. Little pieces of herself she lets slip through her professional armor. Her hand went automatically to her grandmother's ring as she read those words. Had she been so transparent? Day 12. The corporate wolves came today, dressed in suits that used to feel like a second skin to me. Looking at them now, all I see are expensive masks hiding empty men. But Brenda, she treats the janitor who brings flowers with the same respect she shows the chief of surgery. She sees people, not positions. When did I forget how to do that? Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away and read on. Day 15. Had another dream about the accident today, but this time, instead of fear, I felt something else. Gratitude, not for the crash itself, but for the wake-up call. I've spent 15 years chasing a life that was slowly killing my soul. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you never knew you needed. The pages turned, revealing more insights, more quiet observations. His growing strength, his changing perspectives, his deepening feelings, all laid bare in careful handwriting that grew steadier with each entry. Day 23. She told me about Michael today. I saw the shadows in her eyes, the scars that run deeper than skin. I wanted to hold her, to promise her that not all love leaves bruises, but I saw her walls go up, practiced and perfect. She's so used to being strong, she's forgotten she deserves to be cherished. Brenda's hands trembled as she turned to the final entry, dated that morning. Last day. How do you tell someone they've changed your life, that in trying to help you heal, they've healed parts of you that were broken long before any accident? The lawyers would call what I feel transference, a patient's misplaced emotions toward their caregiver, but they don't see how she holds herself apart, maintaining professional distance, even as her eyes betray deeper feelings. They don't know how she fights against every genuine connection, not because she's cold, but because she's protecting a heart that's known too much pain. I'm leaving this journal for her because there are things that need to be said, but she's not ready to hear them face to face. So I'll leave these words as breadcrumbs, hoping they'll lead her back when she's ready to stop running. Brenda, if you're reading this, I know you're scared. I know you've built your walls brick by brick, year by year. I know Atlanta feels safe, feels right, feels like the sensible choice. But I think, in the quiet moments when you're truly honest with yourself, that it's just another wall. I'm not asking you to tear down all your defenses. I'm not asking for promises or guarantees. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that not every love story has to end in pain, that some risks are worth taking, that sometimes the deepest healing happens when we let someone else help us carry our scars. I'll be at Pioneer Square tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. by the old pergola. If you come, we'll take things slow, one day at a time. If you don't, I'll understand. Either way, know this. You've taught me that true strength isn't in never falling, but in how we choose to rise again. The choice is yours, Brenda Elise Carter. No pressure, no demands, no expectations, just possibility. The journal fell closed in her lap as Brenda finally let her tears fall freely. Outside her window, Seattle's lights twinkled against the night sky, each one a tiny beacon in the darkness. Her phone lay on the table, the Atlanta program's number ready to be dialed. One call and she could take the safe path, the sensible route, the road she'd planned for herself. She could keep her walls intact, her heart protected, her life carefully controlled. But as she reached for the phone, her grandmother's ring caught the light, and with it came a memory, not of Michael's betrayal or the pain that followed, but of an earlier lesson, one she'd almost forgotten. She was 8 years old, crying after falling from her bike. Her grandmother had held her close and whispered, "Baby, life's gonna knock you down sometimes, but you got two choices. You can stay down where it's safe, or you can get back up and remember that every scar you carry is proof you were stronger than whatever tried to hurt you." Brenda touched the ring, feeling its familiar warmth. Then, with hands that no longer trembled, she picked up her phone and began to type. Dr. Anderson, about the Atlanta position. The late afternoon sun painted Pioneer Square in shades of gold and amber as the old clock tower struck 6. Brenda sat in her car, parked a block away, watching people pass beneath the historic pergola. She'd arrived an hour early, giving herself time to change her mind, to drive away, to choose safety over possibility. She'd spent the morning tying up loose ends at the hospital. Dr. Anderson had read her message about Atlanta, responded with a simple, "I understand." Sometimes the best path isn't the most obvious one. Monica had hugged her tightly, whispering "about time" in her ear. Now, wearing a simple sundress in deep purple, her grandmother's favorite color, Brenda touched the ring that hung around her neck. For the first time in years, she unclasped the chain, sliding the ring off and holding it in her palm. "What would you say now, Gran?" she whispered. "About taking chances? About letting love in?" As if in answer, a warm breeze rustled through the square's maple trees, carrying the faint scent of gardenias from a nearby flower stand. Brenda smiled, remembering how Cassian had noticed her perfume, one of many small details he'd observed, while she thought she was maintaining professional distance. At 6:45, she finally stepped out of her car. Each click of her heels on the pavement felt like a heartbeat, a countdown, a choice being made with every step. The evening crowd had thinned, leaving the square peaceful in the fading light. She saw him before he saw her. Cassian stood beneath the pergola, no longer in hospital clothes but in dark jeans and a blue button-down that made his eyes seem deeper, more intense. He held a single gardenia, twirling it slowly between his fingers as he watched the sunset. For a moment, Brenda allowed herself to really look at him, not as a nurse observing a patient, but as a woman seeing a man who had journeyed from broken to rebuilt, from guarded to open, from lost to found. He'd chosen to stay in Seattle, to remake his life, to leave possibility open. Now it was her turn to choose. "You're early," she said softly, stepping into view. Cassian turned, the flower pausing mid-twirl. His eyes took her in, the dress, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, the absence of her professional armor, but most of all, he noticed the ring now worn on her right hand instead of hidden on its chain. "So are you," he replied, a smile touching his lips. "I nearly didn't come." "I know." He held out the gardenia. "But you did." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the flower, and neither pulled away. Around them the square had grown quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "I turned down Atlanta," Brenda said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Because of me?" "No." She met his gaze directly. "Because of me. Because running away isn't the same as moving forward. Because—" She touched her grandmother's ring, now a symbol of courage rather than protection. "Because sometimes the safest choice isn't the right one." Cassian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his hair, catching the last rays of sunlight. "And what is the right choice?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I'd like to find out. Slowly, one day at a time." "Slowly," he agreed, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "We both have healing to do, and boundaries to respect, and fears to overcome, and trust to build." With each statement, they drew incrementally closer, the space between them filling with unspoken understanding. When Cassian finally took her hand, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You know," he said softly, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For seeing me. Not the corporate lawyer, not the broken patient, just me." Brenda smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "You saw me too, even when I was trying so hard not to be seen." The last light of day wrapped around them as they stood there. Two people who had found each other in the space between breaking and healing, between professional distance and personal connection, between fear and hope. "Would you like to get coffee?" Cassian asked. "There's a little jazz place around the corner, no pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other outside hospital walls." "I'd like that," Brenda replied, and meant it. As they walked together through the deepening twilight, their steps falling naturally in sync, Brenda felt something shift inside her. Not the crumbling of walls, but the opening of a door she'd kept locked for too long. They didn't hold hands as they walked. They didn't need to. Sometimes the strongest connections are built in the quiet spaces between gestures, in the understanding that healing happens not in grand moments, but in small choices, day by day, step by step. Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Seattle's lights twinkled to life, each one a reminder that after every storm, after every darkness, light finds its way back. And sometimes, in the most unexpected places, hearts find their way home. As they reached the jazz club's door, Brenda paused, looking back at Pioneer Square's pergola, the place where one chapter ended and another began. Cassian waited patiently, understanding without words that some moments need to be marked, remembered, honored. "Ready?" he asked when she turned back to him. Brenda touched her grandmother's ring one last time, feeling not the weight of the past, but the promise of the future. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." And she was, ready to see where this path might lead, ready to take a chance on love that built up instead of tore down, ready to discover that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in standing alone, but in letting someone walk beside you. As they stepped into the warm glow of the jazz club, the soft notes of a familiar melody wrapped around them. "At Last," by Etta James. Brenda smiled, recognizing it as one of the songs she used to hum during her night shifts. Some might call it coincidence, others might call it fate. But for Brenda and Cassian, it was simply the first note of their own song, finally ready to be played. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a real beginning, built on truth, shaped by growth, and open to all the possibilities that courage and time might bring. This was where their heart's journey truly began. 1 year later, the Seattle General Hospital's annual charity gala transformed the downtown Marriott's ballroom into an elegant wonderland of soft lights and flowing champagne. Brenda stood near the entrance, greeting arriving guests with practiced ease. As the newly appointed Director of Nursing Education, she had helped organize the event, which would fund scholarships for underprivileged nursing students. She touched her grandmother's ring, now worn proudly on her right hand, a habit that had transformed from a nervous gesture into one of grounding and strength. The purple evening gown she wore, another nod to her grandmother's favorite color, drew admiring glances, but her eyes searched the crowd for only one person. "Looking for me?" Cassian's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She turned to find him holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, his blue-gray eyes twinkling with affection. "You're late," she chided softly, accepting one of the glasses. "Last-minute case," he explained. "Ramon's daughter, she's interning at the legal aid clinic now, found a family who lost their home due to medical bills. We filed an emergency injunction. Did you win?" His smile was answer enough. In the past year, Cassian had become known for taking on seemingly impossible cases, fighting for patients caught between medical debt and insurance bureaucracy. The corporate shark had transformed into a defender of the vulnerable, though he'd kept his strategic brilliance and determination. "Ramon's here somewhere," Cassian said, scanning the crowd. "He's receiving an award for 20 years of service." "I know. I nominated him." Brenda smiled, remembering the janitor who had faithfully brought flowers to Cassian's room. "His daughter starts medical school next fall." They moved through the crowd together, stopping to chat with hospital staff and supporters. Their relationship was common knowledge now, but they maintained professional boundaries at work. Brenda still dedicated to her patients, Cassian focused on his cases. It was in the quiet moments between their busy lives that they had built something real and lasting. "Dr. Anderson was looking for you earlier," Cassian mentioned as they found a quiet corner. "Something about the Atlanta program wanting to partner with your education initiative here." Brenda nodded. "They want to expand the training model we developed. Turns out staying in Seattle didn't mean giving up the chance to make a bigger difference." "Speaking of staying," Cassian's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Lily called. "The house next door to her in Portland is up for sale. She thinks we should look at it." They'd been discussing moving in together, taking the next step in their carefully paced relationship. Portland would mean being closer to Lily, while still allowing them to continue their work in the Pacific Northwest. "What do you think?" he asked, when she didn't immediately respond. Brenda looked up at him, this man who had learned to rebuild himself, who had taught her that love could be both passionate and patient, who understood that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in life's detours. "I think," she said softly, "that home isn't about the place. It's about who you're with." Cassian's smile deepened, creating the crinkles around his eyes that she'd grown to love. He pulled her slightly closer, respecting the public setting but unable to resist the gravity between them. "Does that mean yes?" "It means we can look," she replied with a playful smile. "One step at a time, remember?" "Always." Monica passed by, shooting them a knowing grin. "Hey, lovebirds, they're about to start the presentations. Brenda, you're up first." As they made their way to their seats, Brenda caught a whiff of gardenias, someone's corsage or boutonniere. The scent took her back to that evening under Pioneer Square's pergola, when she'd chosen possibility over safety. Cassian squeezed her hand gently. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just remembering," she said, "and being grateful for second chances." And third chances, he added, and fourth chances. As many as it takes. The lights dimmed for the presentations, but Brenda held on to the moment, knowing that some things, like trust, like healing, like love, don't happen in single dramatic instances. They happen in the accumulation of small choices, quiet moments, and steady hearts brave enough to try again. Outside, Seattle's eternal rain had paused, leaving the city gleaming under starlight. Inside, two people who had found each other in life's unexpected turns sat together, their futures unfolding not in grand gestures, but in the simple certainty that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about passion overcoming all odds, but about two hearts learning to beat in harmony, two souls finding home in each other's quiet strength. And in that truth, they had both been reborn. If you were in Brenda's shoes, facing the dilemma between accepting a perfect professional opportunity in Atlanta or risking staying in Seattle for a chance at love, which choice would you make? Is it worth giving up a promising career for a relationship that's just beginning, or should we always prioritize our professional growth? What do you think weighs more heavily, the security of a fresh start, far away from everything, or the courage to face your fears and give love a chance? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.